Hi everyone, welcome to another interesting live stream. Uh, Today is going to be fun, I believe. Today is going to be interesting. I've been away for a while, not posted any video for a while, be it short, be it live stream, whatever. I've been away for quite a while. It was necessary, I guess. I needed to be in the right, space physically, mentally, and every other aspect of my life so that I can be fully available to give you guys the best because that's what you guys deserve. You deserve nothing less than the best. So that's what I've been trying to do so far. Hi, 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 hi. Can you guys see me? Can you guys hear me? Uh yeah, so I started with a poll and the poll is going on fine. Right now is the question was how often should I go live? Should I go live once a week, twice a week, or every day of the week? And right now it's between twice a week and every day of the week, and we've had like 47 votes thus far. All right, it's a tie between twice a week and every day of the week. But the poll is still on, and we'll check back by the end of this live stream, and we'll know how far we'll know what the verdict is, what you guys think. And also, this is another opportunity for you guys to know, that you should hit that like button. Subscribe if you are new to this, and yeah, if you are new and you anyway, I don't think if it's I think it's too early to tell you to subscribe, but hit the like button. Hit the like button so that the algorithm will push this out to others and make them know that we are live and get people to tune in and watch. And as always, the super chats are greatly appreciated. As a matter of fact, we already have one, which I greatly appreciate. This is from Rosewell 1983. Thank you for the $50. I don't know what that currency is. 50, I don't know what that currency is, not dollars, sorry. He said I picked every day, but if I'm gonna be realistic, two streams each week would be nice. Yeah, thank you. Yes, I think that was actually the idea I had in mind, like, oh, let me do it twice in a week. But I said, let me see what you guys think. Let me know what you guys think. And I'm open to your comments in the comment section. I want to know what you guys think on the subject. And today we'll be reacting to another Thomas Sowell. Remember the first time we tried to do a reaction to Thomas Sowell, it didn't really go well. And I decided that it's time for us to revisit the subject and react to his videos. Of course, Thomas Sowell is a national treasure for the United States. I mean, he's somebody who should be guarded at all costs. He's well advanced in age at this point. I think he will be in his 90s or so, and yet he's see with the current president of the United States, who is for the most part no longer with us. And but Thomas Sowell is very, he's an intellectual. His intellectual contribution to the West is really remarkable. And not just the West, to the world in general, because many of the things he talk about in his books, in his interviews, are things that are universally applicable and will help every citizen of any nation understand how the world works and understand what to expect from things and understand what the government can do, what the government cannot do. Understand how much of your fate is in your hand and how much of it is determined by your own willingness to change your situation, how much of your predicament is based on your environment, how much of it is based on your culture, your practice, and just, seasons and times and stuff like that. But, for most part in society, everybody believes that every problem that exists can be solved by the government. That's kind of the general notion amongst most people. They just believe, oh, the government can fix it. Let the government fix it. Let the government fix it. And Thomas Sowell is always of the opinion that so many of the things we ask the government to fix, or the government present itself as the fixers, are things that are just impossible for the government to fix. Instead, what they end up doing is to substitute. I call it the substitution method. You take one problem and replace it with another problem, and then claim to have solved the problem. That's basic. For me, I feel that's what the government at best can do. At best, what they can do is substitute. You know, Another word for it is trade-off. There's always going to be trade-off. You cannot have it all. And he kind of emphasized on that reality and has spent most of his life trying to show just how much of this is real in, our human existence, how much of our problem is just conditions. There's something Nigerians usually say. As I was talking about, I just remember a quote, or will I call it a saying, a Nigerian saying. It says, and I'll say it the way Nigerians say it and then interpret it for my Western audience. Nigerians say, "Na condition make crayfish bend." It's a very funny quote. It says, "Na condition make crayfish bend." It means, like, if you see a crayfish, or what you people call what do they even call it now? I've forgotten the names American call it. Some people in the West call it, but crayfish is what we know it. And it's also one of the popular name, crayfish. So when you see crayfish, it's usually bent, right? It doesn't look straight. It looks bent. And it's believed that it's because of the condition upon which the crayfish exists that makes it look bent. It's not really its fault. It's not like the crayfish decided on condition. And for the most part, so many things we see in life, how the world is shaped, it's just condition. It's just the condition you find yourself in. And so many of it, there's little to nothing you can do about it. And some of it is just cultural. If you change the way you live your life, if you change the way you organize your life, if you change your priorities, your interest, you adopt a culture of success, a culture that has proven to be successful over time. So many of these problems just disappear or becomes less, because you've adopted certain disciplines, you've adopted certain way of looking at the world. But what the government will want to let you know is, no. Don't change, don't improve, don't, take personal responsibility or anything like that. Leave it to us. We are going to fix the problem. We are going to make everything better. We have this perfect solution that we've worked out. And you're just going to remain who you are, and you're going to expect more, and we are going to give you more. But then in exchange, what do? They take something, they remove one thing and then replace it with another, and then be like, okay. And then when you complain that this is what you want, they remove the other one and give you the other interest. And the interest is not often the interest of the people, right? The interest of the government is to stay in government, right? Is to have this hold on power. That's the interest of the government. The interest of the government is not to protect your interest. Sometimes they do protect your interest because it is in their interest to do so, but it's not always the case. It's not always the case that it is in their interest to protect your interests. Is especially in a democratic society, people often believe that if I voted this person in, then the person by all means is going to do the what they promise, or do what I believe they will be in line with what I want for myself. And then it often turns out not to be the case because government are individuals anyway. This is from this commenter said, "Okay, bro, but talking about this ish all the time keeps you locked up. Get busy, that's it. Until you die, keep yourself busy with stuff and avoid the plague of too much self-awareness." Yeah, some people are also saying in the comment that there's a Nigerian lag. Is there a lag, guys? Let me know. Although I'm seeing less comments and I don't know what is happening with the whole thing. Is there a lag? Let me know about that. And let me know in the comments. The comments are not coming in. What's happening? Is there a lag? All right. We'll know much later. Well, without talking too much by way of intro, let's go over to the stream and see, and let's go over to the video and start the reaction. All right, here we go.
Introduced himself to me and said that when he saw our guest today on an earlier episode of this program, he felt he was seeing a man who knew how to think. Dr. Thomas Sowell on Uncommon Knowledge now. Thomas Sowell has studied and taught economics, intellectual history, and social policy at institutions that include Cornell, Brandeis, UCLA, and Amherst. Now a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, Dr. Sowell has published more than a dozen books, including the classic A Conflict of Visions. Coming soon, a revised edition of his most recent volume, Discrimination and Disparities. Tom Sowell, welcome.
Thank you.
You grew up in Harlem, dropped out of high school to join the Marine Corps during the Korean War, received an undergraduate degree from Harvard, a master's from Columbia, and your doctorate from the University of Chicago. All of which pales by comparison with the fact that you once tried out for the Brooklyn Dodgers. But during this period, from Harlem to the University of Chicago, throughout your 20s, you've said, you spent most of the decade of your 20s as a Marxist.
Yes.
Why? What was the attraction?
Well, I guess I first was very puzzled. See, there's one little correction I would make. At age 16, I was a dropout, high school dropout, and I went to work full time as a Western Union messenger.
Delivering telegrams.
Delivering telegrams.
We better say that because there will be a generation that won't know what Western Union was. But go ahead.
Yeah, that's true too.
Right.
And so I worked in the area of Manhattan called the Chelsea District, which is around 23rd Street, 9th Avenue. And at the end of the day, I had several ways of getting back home. The easiest and fastest way was with a subway, which was a nickel in those days. When I was feeling flush, I might go for a bus for a dime. And then when I was really getting reckless, I would take the Fifth Avenue bus, which was the elite of the buses, was 15 cents. And so I would walk over to Fifth Avenue, take that bus. And it would take me up through all the glamorous parts of Fifth Avenue, past the Empire State Building, past the great stores and things of that sort. And then on 57th Street, it would turn, and this is just the elite part of town.
Sure, right there where the park starts.
Yes, and then this park starts at 59th.
Oh, sorry.
57th, I would turn over, again, the same kind of scene, past Carnegie.
Obviously cannot relate. but of course, there's a point he's getting to. So when we get to that point, I will understand the description and what he's trying to say. So I guess I just have to stick to him making description of how New York looks like. One day I will go there, hopefully, right? I believe I'll visit, the great state of the Big Apple, right? Is that the state that is known as the Big Apple? I think that's the one. Yeah, I'll visit the Big Apple, but let's keep going.
Hall,
right?
Up Columbus Circle. There was no Trump Tower at that time, and on up to about 72nd Street, and go out to Fifth Avenue, out to Riverside Drive, which is another elite area. So for miles after that, you'd have all these wonderful luxury apartment buildings and so on. And finally, around,
I believe I do see comments from Android. Chidera draws things. I believe I do. I don't think I don't think YouTube discriminates based on device. I just saw yours and I just responded to it. So bring in the comments if you have questions, and obviously can.
on 129th or 30th Street, it would go on a long viaduct, and then it would do a right turn back into the occupied area, and there you'd see the tenements. And I would wonder, why is this? I mean, why this huge disparity? And there was nobody else. There was no other explanation around. There was nothing there other than Marxism. And I stumbled across it. I had not read Marx, but I bought a secondhand set of encyclopedias, small set, for some ridiculously low price. And I looked up Karl Marx. I'd heard the name, and the stuff that he said seemed to make sense.
One thing I like about elderly people, especially people like Thomas, so, these people that you see and you realize that these guys are full of wisdom. Sadly, we have a lot of elderly people with gray hair who are just painfully stupid. Case in point, Joe Biden. But when you see people like, like Thomas, so who with age has come this abundance of wisdom and insight, they always have wonderful stories that teach you stuff, and all their lessons are accompanied with stories that kind of dramatize and make something you're trying to say real. And anybody who has lived in any major city, in the world, whatever city it is, you always see this disparity. Driving, and then you get to a place like in Nigeria, for example, you will see a place that is just busy, a busy city with high-rise buildings, with good roads, and then you go to another part of the city and you see bad roads, you see buildings that just look crazy. And then if you keep driving, you get to the place where there are no roads, bushes, people living, in remote areas with no electricity, and they're all existing in the same state. It's kind of crazy. And sometimes you begin to feel like the reason why someone is, and then it begins to make sense, right? As somebody who is young observing the world, it begins to make sense that, maybe the reason why people in the cities have lots of things and people in remote areas have less or nothing is probably because people in the cities are, robbing people in the remote areas. The rich is taken from the poor, because that's kind of how, Marxists see the whole thing, the haves and the have-nots, this war between them, and how the haves are exploiting the have-nots, and how that is a broken system, and how communism and Marxism is, communism especially, or socialism, is going to fix everything, how the government is going to evenly distribute goods and services and ensure that, there is no equality, and there is fairness, and there is equity, and all that good stuff. It sounds nice. Anybody who listened to it at a young age, like, 19, 20, being very, very idealistic and naive, you believe, you think, it makes sense. It does make sense. It does make sense that we should be able to live in a society where everybody gets, equal resources. You don't have people who are, mega rich, and then have people who are terribly poor, right? Where the rich seem to get richer and the poor just seems to get poorer and poorer, and the only explanation for so many people is that, capitalism has failed, right? This free market that seemed to be driven by greed and profit has failed, because it has led to so many wealthy people. I mean, fewer. That view it makes sense for somebody to buy into that, And even I myself, like when I was younger, way younger, I mean, I will be hard pressed to find. Anyway, there are people like that who have always, believed in capitalism, never bought the idea of Marxism. But even when I was younger, I was tempted by the doctrine, I was tempted by it. I will call it the doctrine because it's not based on reality, of course. It's religious in a way, because, it is. I was tempted by the doctrine, and that doctrine was, somehow there is a way we can evenly distribute wealth, where people don't get there is equity, right? Everybody has equal amount. People don't have more than they need, and we can be happy, and there will be no greed, and resources will be evenly utilized. But when you grow older, you realize that that is impractical. It cannot happen. If there is going to be an even distribution of wealth, well, the major question is, who is going to distribute that wealth? And how are you sure that that person, whoever that person is going to do it justly and is going to do it fairly? For the most part, what we see at the end of the day is people not doing it well. There's always going to be that. So who are you? It's just like censorship, where you're like, oh, we need somebody who is going to be an arbiter of the truth to decide what is true and what is not true, and what can be said and what cannot be said. The question is, who is going to be that person? Who's going to be that person that's going to decide what is true? Who's going to be that person that's going to decide what is not true? It's the same thing with Marxism and same thing with communism and socialism. Is if somebody is going to be in charge of distributing wealth, who is that person going to be? Is there somebody who is going to be in charge of the even distribution of goods and services and resources? Who is that person going to be? And how knowledgeable is that person of individual needs to be able to effectively distribute wealth? And then you realize that, capitalism, for all its flaws, is better than, every other alternative you have out there, because you cannot really trust the government. And some people feel, which is something that I said earlier, some people feel because they elected that government, then they can trust that. I don't know why people, especially people in the West, I find it especially in places where democracies kind of work. Like you have works rather. Like in Africa, for example, where we've never had true democracy for the most part, right? You don't see people who trust the government to really do what they say they will do, or will do it without favoritism, without tribalism, without nepotism, without, all the limitations that human beings face when they have to distribute things that will be fair and even. You will believe that it's hard to find that, because even those people, how they got into power is even questionable. They didn't even care about the will of the people from the onset. How would they even care about the will of people now that they are in power? In Africa, the trust in government has never been there. But in the West, where you have a democratic process that looks kind of functional, for the most part, elections are not being rigged, for the most part, right, in the West. So you feel like, I trust this guy. This is my guy, right? You feel the president is your friend, so you're like, nah, he's going to do a good job. I believe in him. I believe he speaks to things that I agree with. And, I kind of have this connection with the guy. So you feel, no, he's going to do a good job. But at the end of the day, if you are real with yourself, you realize, nah, he's not doing it. He's not doing as much of a good job as you want. None of them, even the best of them, has really done everything the way you want it to be. And it's not just because they are bad people, in general. It's just because of basic human limitations. Like, will you really trust that guy? Will you really trust anybody to do that? So the best option is to leave it to you as an individual, right? To decide, how goods and services are going to be evenly distributed. You as an individual should be the one to decide that. And how you decide that is through a market system where price decides how resources are being allocated. If you read basic economics, you understand everything I'm talking about. Thomas Sowell really broke the whole thing down, how the market work, how price work, and everything. So that is the best way for we as individuals to determine that. And when you have an open market system, a free market system rather, where price is what determines how goods and services are being used and allocated and utilized, and price being the interaction between producers and consumers, basically. When you look at it from that angle, you realize that when people are able to provide goods and services and do it excellently, they are going to get rich. They're going to get rich. And when people patronize them, that's how society functions. That's how wealth is created. Like, wealth creation is the ability for a society to effectively allocate goods and services. And how it effectively does that is to leave it in the hand of the individual. And capitalism is the only system that really allows individuals to decide how the economy runs. The problem, however, is that, and I think one of the limitations, which I call a limitation of capitalism, one of them, and I think there are many, but one of them that I can think off the top of my head, is when consumers are, one, gullible, easily deceived by, by sale, whatever advertisement they see. That's one. Then they get to purchase things they don't really need, and get hooked on things they're not supposed to be hooked on because they're not smart. So consumer behavior that is negative gets reinforced by profits and capitalism. So it continues. And capitalism does not really necessarily change human behavior. It just exploits it. So one of the problems with capitalism is that as an individual, now the power is on you for you to decide how, resources are going to be allocated. And then you realize in society that you now have a bunch of people in society who are not responsible with how they spend, responsible with, how they want to utilize the resource that they have, responsible with what they want. For instance, think about, the trend in trap music, for example. It's because there is a demand for it. And why there's a demand for it is because we have, consumers who, for the most part, are not intelligent, are not brilliant. And that has led to the preponderance, the proliferation of trap music, which is terrible music. Because people now have bad taste in music. You can use that to, find so many things in society where you say, okay, this is the ill of capitalism. But when you really look at it closely, it's because we have a bunch of irresponsible consumers. And will I call it unintelligent consumers? But what is the other alternative? You're going to trust in a philosopher king, a guy who is like one man that can really know everything about everyone and can decide what you want. When you give, one thing about capitalism is that it gives power to the people, right? When it does that, the problem with giving power to the people is that you realize that people are not responsible for the most part. And that is not really the fault of capitalism now, is it? It's just human irresponsibility. So I don't know, I'm just rambling. I don't know if any of the things I've been saying so far makes anything that resembles common sense, but that's what I think. What do you guys think? This is from Contour Leotards. He said, I think Joe is stupid. I think he's declining and not a snapper like Thomas. I mean, it goes without saying. And this is from KNG. What you said cannot be, my distance is not displaying it, but you said we're about to, and I get that, right? Also, like, boycott is also a way that consumers tell producers what they want. Like, that's capitalism at work. When you see boycotts happen, that's being used in marketing, but also lies, just straight out lies, right? It's being used in marketing, and sometimes consumers are not intelligent enough, and maybe there can be rules to state that, people should not just expressly lie in commercials, right? Maybe that's where the government should step in. Kenji said, makes sense, Frank. All right, thank you. Google Girl said, love your program. God bless you. And you crack me up in laughter and always make my day. My pleasure. I try to be funny, like I always say. And moving on.
And then later on, I would get more and more into it. That argument was that the rich had gotten rich by taking from the poor.
Right.
And well, that was one explanation. But what is interesting, there was no other explanation out there really, and that's true largely in our colleges.
And you start reading Marx in your late teens.
No, I started reading Marx, yes, 1940, at age 19.
Age 19, and then you were in the Marine Corps for a couple of years. What was it? 2-3 years?
2 years. It was actually 1 year, 11 months, and 5 days. But who's counting?
All right. So by the time you went to Harvard, you had already become intellectually engaged with Marxism.
Yes.
And remained, and Harvard didn't talk you out of it, and the study of economics at Harvard didn't talk you out of it, nor did getting a master's at Columbia, nor did getting a doctorate at Chicago dissuade you from Marxism. Is that? And you studied with Milton Friedman of all people. How could you have sat in Milton Friedman's classroom and remained a Marxist?
Some people are just stubborn. Not simply the personification of the general will like Rousseau or others. The government is an the government institutions have their own institutional interests. One involved the minimum wage law. I was a big supporter of that, but I also
Anyway, he's going to explain it further, but there's something he said that I just want to pause there. And two things I want to say. One is that the only thing that is going to, for so many people, one thing that is going to make them abandon certain wrong notions or mindset is reality, right? I think for so many people, it's just reality that's going to awaken them to the fact that so many of the things that they hold to be true are really not so, right? Reality. Just getting exposed to reality and realizing how the world works. And, like for so many people, they never knew how totalitarian their government was until COVID lockdown. And then they realized, no, these people are really tyrants. These guys are tyrants. So many people did not know how wrong medical experts have been. Some people think medical experts became wrong 2 years ago. No, they've always been wrong on a lot of things. People did not know about it until COVID happened and people realized, whoa, the experts can be wrong. And all of a sudden, people are like, Jesus Christ. And this is one thing about falsehood. When you realize one falsehood from an individual, especially when it's a big one, you begin to ask yourself, what else are they lying about? And now people are beginning to realize, oh, this is not the only thing they lied about. Oh, they also lied about this. And they also lied about this. And they also lied about this. So reality is usually the thing that kind of kick people out of the notion. Let me not call it stupid. You're just believing in certain attractive ideas that have no... that when being put in practice are just disastrous. What would dissociate people from those kind of ideas is reality, right? So just like you can't find somebody in Venezuela who is pro-socialism, right? You'll be hard pressed to find somebody from that part of the world saying, yeah, socialist, to the moon. It's people who are in capitalist, societies who are like, oh, yeah, maybe we should try out socialism, because all they have had is, how wonderful it is, how great it is. But when you see it play out, you begin to be like, okay, this is really not as advertised, right? And I think another thing is also something he mentioned, which I mentioned earlier, is that people don't realize this. And I don't think there's enough that can be said. I don't think you can overemphasize it, because people need to hear it over and over and over and over. Even in Africa, I think people need to hear it over and over again. The government has its own interest. Government agencies have their own interest. Government bodies have their own interest. And that interest does not include you for the most part. They are not the same. Sometimes they align, but not always. They have their own interests. Let's say the FBI, the CIA, Ministry of Education, FDA, whatever it is people have in the West, the NIH. Which one do they have again in the UK that I can think of? I don't even know. But, even in Nigeria, you talk about Ministry of Education, Ministry of Information, Ministry of Youth Affairs, Ministry of Tourism, all those crazy ministries that Nigerian government can create out of the blues. Those do not exist for your interest. They exist for their own interest. People working in those ministries are not working in those ministries thinking, oh, I'm working this morning and what I'm thinking of is how to make the life of the average citizen better. No, they think about how to secure their job, how to remain enough in their position in the bureaucracy, how to climb the ladder of the bureaucracy and get to the top. And in those bureaucracies, you see a lot of politicking going on. And those politicking going on, they're not thinking about you in the streets. They're thinking about themselves. Those people in suits and tie, they're thinking about how to climb up, how to get ahead, how to ensure that their job remains. Think about it. Let's say the government in their benevolence and good intention, abundance of which the bank of which never runs dry, right? When it comes to good intentions, government, especially the ones we find in the West, have endless good intentions, and for that reason they set up so many agencies. So let's say, for example, they want to end poverty, they want to combat poverty, and then they come up with an agency, and the job of that agency is to ensure that poverty ceases to exist. Now, of course, that's not how it usually happens, but this is a hypothetical, right? So they come up with that agency, and the job of that agency is to ensure that by, let's say, in 3 years' time, there will be no such thing, or we are going to eradicate poverty in, let's say, this country A. What do you think will happen if they succeed in getting rid of poverty? What happens is that agency is no longer relevant. Office closed. Everybody go home. Job done. Right? So what do you think the agency is going to do? Get rid of poverty? There's a statement we say in Nigeria. We say, and I'll say it the way Nigerians say it, government work, no they finish. I want to say that. I know if there are Nigerians in the chat, they understand exactly what I'm saying. In Nigeria, we say government work, no they finish. What that means is that if you are working for the government, the job you do for the government does not end. You will keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. It doesn't end. And the aim is not to make it end. So that's why people always say government job does not finish. It does not end. If government starts a project, the project does not end. It keeps going. The program will keep going. Keep going and going. Because if it ends, a lot of people lose their job. A lot of bureaucrats get kicked out of office. Will not occupy the position they occupy. Why will anyone want that? So what do you think they are going to do? They're going to maintain the problem. That is now their interest. Their interest is no longer to really find solution, is to just ensure that the problem keep existing so that there will be a need for their office or a need for their agency. So, whenever you think of the government, think about that. Have that in mind. Whenever they tell you we are going to fix so problem, ask yourself, if that problem really ceases to exist, why will you need them? And do you think they will want you to not need them? Of course not. So, for me, that's how I see it. I may be wrong, but that's exactly how I see how the government works. And I don't think for the most part they are looking out for your own. They have their own interest. Job security is one of their interests. And they will do anything for that job to remain. That is why the job will never end. right? So
Knew that there was an argument that minimum wage laws simply price low-wage workers out of a job. And my first assignment dealt with minimum wages in Puerto Rico. And as I looked at the numbers, I would see as they would jack up the minimum wages, the number of jobs would go down and so forth. But there were two explanations. One was that of the economists, that you price the people out of a job, and the other was that there were hurricanes that had come to Puerto Rico. You see, during the sugar harvesting, and therefore, and I was studying the sugar industry, and therefore it destroyed a lot of the crop. Therefore, you wouldn't hire as many workers. Now in Chicago, I'd been taught that if there are two different theories, there should be some empirical evidence in principle that could distinguish what would happen under one theory from what would happen under the other.
Right.
And so I wrestled with that for most of the summer. And one morning I came in and I said, I got it. What we need are data on the amount of sugar cane standing in the fields before the hurricane struck. And as I waited for the congratulations, I could see stricken looks around me in the room. Like, this guy has stumbled on something that will ruin us all. You know? And they said, well, we don't have those data. I said, oh, I'll bet the Department of Agriculture has it. And he said, well, but that doesn't mean we have it. You'd have to have a request go up the chain of command to the Secretary of Labor. He would then confer with the Secretary of Agriculture. It would come down the chain of command in the Department of Agriculture to whoever has those numbers, and so on. I said, good. Well, they say a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, so I will now submit my request to the Secretary of Labor, which I did. And I am still patiently awaiting this reply.
And the institutional fear of the number was.
and that report would never come. It would never come because, come on, you want to realize that actually they are not really helping the situation. Of course not.
What? That it would.
A significant percentage of the Labor Department's resources come from administering the minimum wage law. One of the real farces of all this is that the law itself, Section 4D, I still remember, requires the Labor Department to study the employment effects of minimum wages. And those studies are absolutely a farce. In fact, some years after I left, I did an article saying why those studies were a farce. And when I came back later on to the Labor Department to do some research, one of the older librarians who remembered me turned to the younger librarian and she said, this is the man who wrote that article that has everybody up in arms.
So you began to be
It's just think about it. You have a ministry that is to enforce a particular law, and the law they are enforcing turns out not to be effective. And so one of the major objectives of that ministry is to enforce that law. Think about it. The main job of the ministry is to enforce that law. And also one of the job of the ministry is to research and make analysis to see how effective the law is. And then another thing about the ministry is also that they know that the law they are enforcing is not good. What do you think they are going to do? They have food in front of them and then they're just going to take that food out of their own mouth. They're going to bite the very hand feeding them. Of course not. So they're going to, minimum wage laws have been very effective. That's what they're going to say. And they're going to keep enforcing it because that's what they've been created to do. You do not, this is how the government work. The government is like a student who sets his own exam, writes the exam that he has set for himself, and then mark his own script, and then gives himself whatever grade he wants. What do you think he's going to do? You think he's going to fail himself? No. It's a huge success. They always succeed. And when it's obvious that they failed, they point the blame somewhere else. It is never the fault of the government. It's the fault of something else outside, that now needs them to have more power and to create more bureaucracies. It's just how the cycle goes. Whenever there's a problem from the problem they've created, they need to create another agency to tackle that problem. And then the government keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So
swayed of Marxism
and of government in general, because the government is not out there at the personification of the national interest.
Right.
They have their own interests, and the Labor Department was clearly an interest in keeping the minimum wage, because that's their jobs and careers.
All right.
And power.
Which brings us, if I may, to one of my favorite books, your 2000 book. This is a beat up old copy. This book, Conflict of Visions.
Yes.
Which you published in 2007. And you lay out, I'm sorry.
1987.
I beg your pardon, 1987.
Reprinted in 2007.
Well, beat up as this book is, it turns out this is a reprint, sorry. 1987. And you lay out two competing ways of looking at economics and politics, really two competing ways of looking at life that go back at least 200 years, the constrained vision and the unconstrained vision. The constrained vision, I'm quoting from A Conflict of Visions, sees the evils of the world as deriving from the limited and unhappy choices available, given the inherent moral and intellectual limitations of human beings, close quote. So
I want to go to that quote again, and I want to read it for us. Say the constrained vision, which is obviously the vision that Thomas dead and unhappy choices are valuable given the inherent moral and intellectual limitations of human beings. So what is the constrained vision? The constrained vision sees the world for what it is. Realize that the world and we ourselves are limited human beings. Those are the two major things about the constrained vision. We are living in a world with so many limitations, and we as human beings have so many limitations. So when you're living in that world, a flawed world with flawed people, so many things are bound to happen. And somebody with that vision understands that about human beings and how humans operate, and understand that the solution to all of that is if we as you as an individual can try in your own find something within your own sphere of control that you can control and try and control your life, put your life in order, put everything about your life in order. That's the best you can do, and that's the foundation. That's where you should start from. That is what the constrained vision also suggests. If there is a problem, start with the man in the mirror. Michael Jackson's song. Start with the man in the mirror. Try and see what you can fix about yourself first. It begins with you. Is the constrained vision's solution to every problem. It begins with you. What can you do in your personal life? That can help reduce the problem. That's where you start from. You start with yourself. So that's essentially the constrained vision.
From the limited and unhappy choices available, given the inherent moral and intellectual limitations of human beings, close quote. So the constrained vision understands itself as constrained by the... Got it. And then to continue here, the constrained vision, again, quoting from A Conflict of Visions, for the amelioration, improvement of the human condition, the constrained vision relies on certain social processes such as moral traditions, the marketplace, or families, not government. So explain that. Why do we rely on processes rather than the will of the people instituting changes to improve our condition?
Well, it doesn't ignore government. Even for the market to work, you have to have a government. As Europe discovered when the Roman Empire collapsed, and the economies collapsed also. But I guess one of the reasons would be that with the government, you have surrogate decision makers, and they cannot possibly know as much as the individuals whose personal decisions have been preempted.
I see. All right, which brings us to the unconstrained vision.
Before they go to the unconstrained vision, there's something he said that is very, very important. He said in the government you have surrogate decision makers. So there are people making decisions for other people. And the question is, how can they know what other people want? So that is why you do not rely on the government. Like we said, you don't want to rely on surrogate decision makers. And I think one of the reasons, especially in the West, why you see people relying so much on the government is that people are very, very irresponsible. We live in a culture, not just Westerners, but also you see we have a pandemic of irresponsible people, increasing in number and becoming problematic, seriously problematic. You have people who don't know how to take control of their life, don't want to take charge of their life. They want to point to someone else to say, decide for me, choose for me, think for me, do everything for me. Let me just, not think. Let me not act. Let me not make decision. Let them make decision. And then maybe one of the benefit of that is that when things go wrong, you will not blame yourself. You can at least find someone else to blame, right? But it's not how you should live as an individual. You should learn to take responsibility, be in charge of your own destiny. Your life is in your hand, and anybody who wants to take that away from you, you tell the person, no, for the most part, I have to be the decider of my own fate. That is what the government should do. I think a great system of government is a system of government that puts your fate in your hands and say you decide how you want your life to go for the most part. And of course, I'm not saying everything about your destiny is going to be 100% in your hand, and that government should not, put some restrictions where necessary. But for the most part, as much as it should lie on you. It should lie on you. The onus should always be on you for the most part. But you take charge. And we now have them in abundance. So what they always want to do is to get surrogate decision makers. They want someone else to decide for them. And you're like, why? What makes you think that person is going to decide well for you? And whatever that person comes up with is going to be beneficial to you. So I guess that is one of the problems that we are facing in today's society, in today's world. The pandemic of irresponsible people, pandemic of people who don't want to take control of their lives, pandemic of people who want to, who want to give crucial decision making to other people. For example, you tell somebody about medicine, for example, let's say vaccine. And you're like, oh, you need to read up on these vaccines and know what exactly you are putting in your body. And that person doesn't want to do that. He doesn't want to read the findings that are publicly available, the reports that have been made on some of these things. They are too lazy to even process that information. So they're like, oh, no. Because anytime I hear people quote experts, like someone say, oh, the experts have said, I just say this person is intellectually lazy. You don't want to do the real work of really looking at what the experts have said. Look at the studies they've come up with. Look at their report. Really study this thing and ask crucial questions. You have to, put your brain to work. And people don't want to do that. So what do? They say, oh, no. The experts have spoken. The experts have spoken. The experts have spoken. And then they follow what the experts have said. And that's how they end up, with vaccine injuries. So I think that's one of the problems that we have in the West too.
Again, I'm quoting you. When Rousseau said that man is born free but everywhere in chains, he expressed the essence of the unconstrained vision, in which the fundamental problem is not nature or man, but institutions.
Yes.
Would you explain that one?
Well, he has the notion that, that good things happen naturally. And if there are bad things, it's because institutions, including civilization itself, have made these bad things happen. And of course, and I think that's really the implicit assumption behind a lot of things that are said on the left today. Why in my most recent book I go to a lot of trouble to show that in nature there's nothing resembling equal opportunity. That wherever you look around the country, around the world, you find people who live up in the mountains, poor and backwards, even in the richest countries. Including the United States. Mm-hmm. I believe the poorest country in the United States, the county rather, was in a mountain community, which was almost 100% white.
Somewhere in Appalachia, West Virginia, Southern Ohio. Right.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And that men in that county had a life expectancy 10 years less than men in a county in Virginia.
And the unconstrained vision says, let's fix that.
Do you guys understand what Thomas Sowell is trying to say here? Is that even in nature, even in the world, there's no equal opportunity. Equal opportunity does not exist even in the world. Look, most of the natural resources that the world relies on, for the most part, you find them in Africa and in the Middle East. You don't find them in the West for the most of them, Africa is blessed with so many natural resources that some parts of the world don't have. Even natural resources are not evenly distributed on every land in the world. So everybody does not have equal access to opportunity in that regard. There are so many geographical advantages that certain geographical locations have that the others do not have. How do you equally distribute good geographical locations? You can't. The earth is not the same everywhere. There are highs, there are lows, there are mountains, there are valleys, there are oceans, there are seasides, there are, waterlocked, landlocked areas. There are, different land, different, people who live in the desert. How are they going to have equal access to fertile land, to fertile soil that can grow certain crops? In Nigeria, for example, we can't grow apple. Apple does not grow here. Why is there no equal opportunity to grow apples? So if a Nigerian wants to grow apples, he can't. Except he lives in Jos. I think they say Jos people know how to. I don't know. Anyways. But at least the rest of the country cannot grow. Apple cannot grow here. There are also other crops that can grow here that cannot grow in the United States or cannot grow in Europe. There's no equal opportunity in that regard. So the way the world is, all fingers, like Nigerians will say, people say anyway, all fingers are not equal. You are not dealt the same hands. You can't. It's not possible. Even in nature itself, there's so many inequality of opportunities. You don't have the same opportunities. That's essentially what he's saying. There's no equality of opportunity available in nature. There are certain jobs that you can't do in Nigeria. There are certain jobs in Nigeria you can't do abroad. Those opportunities don't exist everywhere evenly. What are we going to do about that? What would people who are fighting for equality, what would they do about that? And this is another problem with people who fight about equality, and that is why they will not even recognize that there are like biological difference between men and women that makes it that men are more capable of doing certain things and women are not. That the opportunities that are available to men are not the same that are available to women. So when you are a proponent of equal opportunity, you are going to undermine nature itself. You are going to undermine natural realities. And tell yourself that no, we can make everything available to everybody at every time equally. Of course you can't. And it's not because there is a system out there that is stopping you. It's just reality. Reality constrains you. And when people, if people for the most part can accept reality and live their life according to reality, the world will not become a better place, but it's not like it's going to become a better place. I mean, it is already how it is, but at least we'll be able to function better in the world.
Surely we can pass a law that would improve that. And the constrained vision says, well, now wait a moment. If people who live in isolated pockets in mountains are poor and backwards all around the world, and we see this pattern over and over and over again, maybe there's something very deeply rooted in reality about that that's hard for us to get at. Correct?
Yes.
All right. So in the book, A Conflict of Visions, you're very dispassionate and very analytical, and you lay out the unconstrained vision, and you lay out the constrained vision, and you don't really come out blazing in favor of one or the other.
No, that is not a book meant to show that one vision is better than the other. It's there to show you what they are and what you're assuming if you go one direction or another.
Okay.
And it's to encourage people to understand the implicit assumptions behind all this, without which you're just at loose ends.
All right. So, pondering all this, I noticed something, a column that you wrote.
I do, Club Nod. There's like a few second delay, but that's kind of how I set up the whole. This is like a 10 seconds or 20 seconds delay, but this is live. It's live. It's not a replay. And this is from Fightback. He said we have to stop digesting the West idea to explain our problems because our main problem is thinking the West has the intelligence and ideas. There are Western ideas that make sense. It's just modern Western ideas, for the most part, that is the problem. And even some of the modern Western ideas, they're not really modern. It's just that in today's society, they are now becoming popular. They don't used to be popular. They've existed in the past, but people didn't take them seriously. And when people saw the outcome, they kind of ran away from it. But not so many people ran away from it. Many people are still sympathizers of that idea, and they keep pushing it. And now it has become popular again. But Westerners have pretty good ideas. They do have pretty good ideas. Like what Thomas Sowell is talking about, the unconstrained vision, capitalism. That's a Western idea, So
this is a couple of years ago, in which you rebutted Nicholas Kristof of the New York Times. And Kristof had ascribed the gaps between African Americans and whites in America, gaps in wealth, gaps in educational achievement, the usual gaps, to, and this is a quotation from Kristof, to the lingering effects of slavery, close quote.
Oh, yes.
And here's Tom Sowell, quote, "If we wanted to be serious about evidence, we might compare where blacks stood 100 years after the end of slavery with where they stood after 30 years of the liberal welfare state. In other words, we could compare hard evidence on the legacy of slavery with hard evidence on the legacy of liberals." Close quote. And so there it is. Life is hard. You use the word hard. You use the word serious. You use evidence. Tom Sowell is a man of the constrained vision through and through and through. Correct?
Yes.
No.
Yes, part of a vanishing breed, I might add.
So when you were a Marxist, the notion, explain that, because the Marxism.
Well, but no, you see,
Yeah, so that's complicated.
even when I was a Marxist, I had the same intellectual standards.
Right.
And that's what eventually led me away from it.
Oh, I see.
In other words, I hadn't done all the research. I hadn't gone around the world
Looking for evidence.
Yes.
Okay. So,
And socialism is a great idea. That does not mean it's a great reality. One of the things that disturbs me tremendously is about this enthusiasm for Bernie Sanders and socialism at a time when people are literally starving in Venezuela, an oil-rich country. And they're breaking into grocery stores to try to get food, and they're fleeing to neighboring countries, most of which are not all that prosperous themselves, but at least you don't starve to death in them. And none of that makes a bit of difference. I don't think most of these people who are out there cheering for Bernie Sanders have given a thought to Venezuela.
to the evidence.
That's right.
To the evidence.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing about ideologues. Evidence means absolutely nothing to them. That's one thing about ideologues that is really fascinating to me. Like, what is in front of them doesn't mean anything. It doesn't. They live in la la land, and it's nothing. Sometimes it's hard to bring them down out of their imagined world. You know, that place that they've imagined. There's some people, no amount of reality can really kick them out of it. Even when you're like, let's consider hard evidence. Let's consider, what is in front. And there's something he mentioned about how, Black Americans, I don't like calling them African Americans, how Black Americans fared after slavery and how they fared after the liberal welfare state. When welfare system was introduced, they encouraged certain behaviors and led to certain outcomes. There is a huge disparity between the two, and people don't want to make that comparison. Like, is this really the legacy of slavery? Like, it doesn't even make sense. How can people who newly freed slaves, we are faring better than slaves? Newly freed slaves, we are faring better than their descendants 70, 80 years down the line. This is not the legacy of slavery. It has to be the legacy of something else. What is happening here? And the problem is these people will never, especially when it has to do with the government in recent times, admit that, okay, maybe some of the things we are doing right now is not helpful. What have we been doing thus far that has contributed to the problem? No, they have to go back to slavery because they don't want to deal with the problem of now. It's the same thing we see in Africa, especially when people come up and they say they have solutions or they've identified the problem with Africa, and they always say, oh, colonialism is the problem. Colonialism and colonialism, by colonialism, they don't mean the one that is happening recently, especially the one France has been doing for years, right? and has never stopped doing and will insist on doing till thy kingdom come. That's not the colonialism they're talking about. They're talking about the colonialism that happened 1960, 20th century, early 20th century, late 19th century. Those are that's what they're referring to. For them, that is the real problem. And for me, sometimes I see the whole thing as a distraction. You are distracting us with the past so that we will not look at the present. That's how I see it. And that's why I have problem with people who keep dwelling on historic atrocities. I'm like, you keep doing that and you are ignoring the one that is happening right in front of you. Because somehow you think people who did the one in the past have repented and are trying to distance themselves from what they did in the past. No, they've not repented. They are doing the same thing now, and you're not seeing it. Because they convinced you that the problem is the problem of the past, but it is not. It's something that is happening now. The question is, what are they doing now? When you look at what they've done throughout history, especially, I'm not talking about people, I'm not talking about white people, I'm talking about governments. When you look at what they've done in the past, when you look at what Western governments have done in the past, and you're like, wow, these were atrocities that we are committed in the past. Ask yourself, don't be like, oh my God, I'm infuriated by what they did in 1882. Ask yourself, what are they doing now? Have these people really changed? What should concern you is what they are doing now. Like the French government, have they really changed? No. They are still exploiting, Francophone Africa till date. You ask yourself, okay, when you talk about, and I don't know how many, like, especially those in the US, understand that the United States government have imperialist ambitions, right? That's why they start various wars and occupy different locations and influence certain governments. It's not an empire like in the old way, but it still operates as such, and it's the biggest and has imperialist agenda in various parts of the world. Are you aware of that? Are you aware of that? That is part of what is responsible for the war in Ukraine. It's a clash of empires. And you believe, what so empire did at this point was bad. We should just, stick to our own location and concern ourselves with how our people are faring and just, local politics and all whatnot. Okay, fine. But are you aware of what your country is doing abroad? But you want to talk about what your country did abroad in 1822. Like, have you considered what they are doing, what they did yesterday? A good ally of France, for example, has been Gabon, right? And Gabon has had a president who I don't know if any of you pay attention to African news, but the president of Gabon has been, the person who claimed to have won the election in Gabon has been, deposed, has been removed by the military. So there has been a military coup in Gabon. So if you are keeping track, we have military coup in Mali, military coup in Burkina Faso, military coup in Niger, and now military coup in Gabon. And all these countries are West African countries under the control of France. Why are there military coups in all of these places? There is a strong rejection of Francophone government. Gabon, for example, the president have been like the lapdog of the president of Gabon have been like the lapdog of the French government. And what have they been doing in Gabon? You have a president who was president of the country for 49 years. He's a democratically elected president, though. That's, if you ask France now, do you think Gabon is a democracy? They will shout to the top of their voice, "Oui." In case you don't know, "oui," that's yes in France. In French, rather. They will agree, right? Gabon that's epitome of democracy as far as France is concerned. But they've had a president that has been president for 49 years, handed over to his son. President for the first term, 4 years, another second term, 8 years, and declared himself winner for the third time. And now, if they want to orchestrate a military intervention in Gabon, they will say it's to restore democracy. But from what I've told you, do you think do you get the idea of what is happening in Gabon is a democracy? Of course not. That's what we call French democracy in Africa. Is anybody talking about that in Western circles? Have you seen the French government being reprimanded for its activities in Africa? No. If anybody wants to even criticize the French government's activity in Africa, they talk about it like it stopped happening it stopped happening in the year 1945. And the funny thing that annoys me the most about the French government is that they pride themselves as people who believe in liberty and liberation and freedom. You know, when America won the American Revolutionary War, I believe, after they won the war, was it not the French government who gifted them the Statue of Liberty, congratulating them for liberating themselves from the British Empire, presenting themselves as people who believe in liberty? But what are they doing in Africa? The exact opposite. Talking about hypocrisy. And when people want to criticize the West, they talk about something that happened in the past. I'm like, stop doing that. That's a distraction. Let's talk about what's happening today. You know, I don't even know how I got into this subject, but let me leave it.
Which brings us to something that you refer to in a number of columns as the retrogression, the experience of African Americans in this country. Economic progress, I'm quoting you. Despite the grand myth that black economic progress began, poverty rate among blacks fell from 87% in 1940 to 47% in 1960. But over the next 20 years, the poverty rate among blacks fell another 18 percentage points. This was just the continuation of a previous economic trend, but at a slower rate of progress. It was not some grand deliverance, close quote. That is so counter to what we are taught in school, what appears on the pages of newspapers.
I will, Club Nod. I will.
I feel as though I want to ask you, you really want to stick with that?
Slowly. I don't know how long this would be.
This recent book, Discrimination and Disparities, I point out that this really is a pattern not peculiar to blacks or even to the United States. That you can see the same thing in England, you can see it in any number of other countries. That the poor were much worse off economically, let's say in the first half of the 20th century. And yet, in terms of their own behavior, they were far more decent societies. And afterwards, after this welfare state that's supposed to make them better off and better human beings, that's when the crime rate skyrocketed on both sides of the Atlantic. The British were famous for being perhaps the most polite, considerate society in the world prior to that. After that, you get things like the 2011 riots over there, went through London, Manchester, where they're going through this. They anticipated Ferguson and Baltimore by a few years. And the same things, the burning down of buildings, the throwing of gasoline bombs, the whole schmear. And none of those people were descendants of slaves.
So the poor people were doing, if the lesson of the 20th century is something like poor people, including in this country African Americans, were improving their lot and leading fundamentally decent lives until the government decided to help them.
Yeah, yes.
That's a fair statement.
Well, they're better off economically because of what's been given.
Right.
But of course, when you have the crime rate, I mean, I got the first inkling of this some years back when I was at some school in Harlem doing some research, and I had looked out the window and I mentioned in passing that when I was a little kid, I used to walk my dog in that park, and looks of horror came over the students' faces. Nobody in his right mind would have a child go into that park, walking a dog or not. The principal was warning these students not to cross this park, which is about a block and a half wide, even in groups of 6. And when I told them about how in these hot summer nights I would sleep out on the fire escapes in Harlem, they looked at me like I was a man from Mars. People were doing that all over New York. They were doing it in Philadelphia, Washington, wherever I've known people. That was a common thing for poor people. We didn't have the money for air conditioning.
Right.
You slept out on the fire escape or in the parks. Where Walter grew up
Walter Williams.
Walter Williams grew up in a housing project in Philadelphia. He was saying on the hot summer nights, the people would be in this project would have little balconies. They'd sleep out on the balconies, and the ones on the first floor who didn't have balconies would sleep out in the yard. And that there were old men who you could see sit on a hot summer night, sitting outdoors into the wee hours playing cards or checkers or whatever. It was a different world.
It was a safe world.
And it was infinitely safer.
Now, what about family structure, Tom? Again, I'm quoting you. Most black children were being raised in two-parent families in 1960. 30 years after the liberal welfare state, the great majority of black children were being raised by single parents.
Yes.
How does that, by the way, we should note that.
I don't know if you guys are noticing from what is being said how government intervention is making things worse. Government intervention is leading to an increase in crime. Government intervention is leading to an increase in fatherlessness. Are you noticing it? It's important for, especially those in the West. I think this is important, stuff that you guys need to really look into, consider, and think about. I don't know. In Nigeria here, we don't have our government trying to do so many things. Instead, what they usually try to do is to frustrate the average individual in every way they can imagine. We know our government as active frustrators, like they are a major problem. I remember, but one thing I remember, I think it happened last year and even part of this year, was when the collapse of the Naira was happening at a rapid rate. It started last year, continued into this year. And the government were coming with so many ridiculous policies trying to remedy the situation. And every policy they came up with, everything they came up with only made the matter worse. It was so funny to watch. At one point, it was just literally comical. Every time they do something, I will call my brother, and my brother will be like, watch, it's going to make the matter worse. And just like he said, it's to make the matter worse. Like, they'll come up with this policy, and let's say a dollar was selling for 600 naira, right? And then they'll come up with this policy, and then the dollar will be selling for 700 naira. And then it will go 750, 850, and then maybe it drops back a little. I'll be like, okay, maybe it's the policy. And then it starts shooting up again. And then the government will be like, okay, we are coming up with a new policy, and this one is going to really address the situation. It's going to really address the situation. And it doesn't. The Naira was falling, the dollar was rising. It was funny. It was just comical to watch. And I was telling my brother that the real, when I was talking with him about the whole collapse of the Naira that was happening from late last, it has been happening since for a very long time. It just keep going down, 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 has never really appreciated significantly. So I was telling him that the problem is that the government think that by coming up with a policy, a monetary policy, they're going to fix the economy, right? The Naira is a reflection of the amount of goods and services that exist in the country. It's not a reflection of your monetary policy. That's what it reflects. The amount of goods and services, the amount of value that your country creates, the amount of value that your country has is reflected in your Naira. It's not really, we came up with this monetary policy and that is what is destroying the Naira. Is that you don't have value. Your economy does not have as much value when you compare it to the US economy. That is why it keeps falling. That is this important. Instead of the government trying to see what can we do to make the economy real better, the economy itself, how can we improve the economy? What policies are we enacting that is making the economy worse? What are we doing that is making the economy worse? Can we stop doing that? Instead of the government thinking about doing that, they're like, no, if we can come up with a better monetary policy, it's going to fix the whole problem. And I'm like, no, it will never happen, because this is not a monetary issue. It's not about central bank regulations. And the funny thing is that they did not even know. I feel maybe the government are too ignorant to know, or maybe they know and they don't do anything about it. Whatever it is that is wrong with them, is them not realizing that we got to the situation we got to in the economy in part due to their monetary policies and their heavy regulation on dollar naira exchange in the country. Like, that is part of the problem. And you think by creating more regulation or exchanging regulations, getting rid of this regulation and introducing another regulation, the problem is going to disappear? Of course not. You know, and that's why when I look at these people, I'm like, people in government really don't know how to solve problems. I don't understand why people have so much faith in them. Like, they've repeatedly shown that they do not know how to solve problems. And maybe it's not that they don't know how to solve problems. It is not in their interest. Or maybe it's a combination of both. They don't know how to solve problem, and it's also not in their interest to solve the problem. You know, something for people to think about.
Patrick Moynihan publishes the Moynihan Report in 1965.
Yes.
And he's alarmed because the illegitimacy rate among black families is 25% then.
Fight back. You're asking what my name is. I don't know if it is me you are asking, but if it's me, his name is Frank. Right.
Now, among whites, it's over a third.
Yes.
Hispanics, it's over half. And among African Americans, it's over 70%. What's going on there?
Well, this is again, this too. You find the same thing in Britain. You find it in France and Norway. You find it in the Western world. In fact,
The dissolution of the family structure.
Oh yeah, there are any number of Western nations where 40% of the children are raised with only one parent.
Right.
At the extremes, compared to Asian countries, at the extremes, Iceland, it's 2 out of 3 children born are raised in a single-parent home.
We have to make you work. Someone has to reach out to the other person. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. Okay, I've had all the requests, and we'll see. You know. That's an explanation, but that's not all the explanation. You know, when people blame the World Bank and these institutions, fair, maybe there's something that they are doing, but have you seen what African leaders are doing? Jesus Christ, have you seen what African leaders are doing? Then you realize, okay, if maybe there's a path to the World Bank and this, you know, big institutions. Maybe there's a role that they are playing, but there's also a role that the government also is playing. A very crucial role, one that is more immediate than what these institutions are doing. You know, so. Kim J said, Amala is wonderful. I have no doubt about that. I have no doubt. Believe me, one of the people that I look forward to having a conversation with is Amala Epunobi. I have so many wonders. Anyway, I hope it happens anyway. I really hope it happens. It's one of the persons that I would love to have a conversation with. On so many, she's wonderful, fascinating. You know, and I believe if we ever have that conversation and we do it live, it's going to be interesting. There are going to be a lot of interesting things that we'll cover and discuss. So, yeah.
South Korea is 1 out of 66.
Wow. And so, that's the welfare state?
Yes,
it is.
Oh, you're paying. You're creating a situation where if the first of all, you're creating a situation where if the man stays there, the government will not give the woman welfare, and if he leaves, it will. And so they're paying. When you pay people not to get married, more people don't get married.
Right. Okay.
True.
So what would have happened if Lyndon Johnson, instead of becoming a liberal, had remained a crusty, tough, skeptical Texas conservative,
yes,
which is certainly the way he started his career. If Lyndon Johnson had embraced the constrained vision, instead of instituting the war on poverty and the Great Society and so forth, what would the country look like today?
A lot better. You would not have the same rates for crime and so on. Because, you see, you can't have a welfare state in a democratic country unless you first have a welfare state vision. And when you buy all the assumptions of that vision, then you're buying a lot of trouble. One of the episodes I think epitomized it was in France in this case. That there were knife attacks by various people from North Africa against Chinese people in some suburb of Paris. And one of the things that the attackers said, that why are you attacking the Chinese? And it wasn't because of anything the Chinese had done to them. He said they have nice clothes and big cars. That's not fair. I mean, that's egalitarianism as a philosophy is one thing, but the actual consequences of it mean things like resenting other people's good fortune.
Right. Yeah.
All right. So
Yeah,
one
it's
response to the
one-
gap.
It's really, that why can't why them, why not me, kind of mentality. And under that resentment that people have over people who are making more than them, you now plant the seed of socialism or communism. It's going to flourish, and that's why I always say that the doctrine of this, this movement is very enticing. Very, very enticing, especially to people who are poor and angry about it, right? Poor and resentful and angry with the fact that their neighbor is doing well. I think it's something you also find, especially in societies where people are prospering. Some people consider themselves, some people in the US will call themselves poor, but by so many metrics, they are not. Like if you compare the way you live to the way the average African lives, you realize that you are not really poor. But, because you are surrounded by so much that you take for granted, you believe you are poor. And then you look at someone else who is doing better than you, and you're like, why can't I be that person? Why can't I have what that person has? And then somebody comes and meets you and say, you know what? We are going to make everything equal. We are going to take from that guy and we are going to evenly distribute it and make sure that nobody is richer than the other person. That is always going to sound appealing to you. And on that, you can sell the idea of communism, you can sell the idea of socialism, and people are going to buy it. That is why it is really tempting and enticing. But in reality, everyone who buys into it suffers.
Again, I return to this gap between African Americans and other Americans. Affirmative action.
Yes.
Which brings us back to your alma mater, Harvard. According to
I'll never live it down.
You'll never live it down, yes. You once told me that the principal benefit of a Harvard degree was never again having to be impressed by anybody who had a Harvard degree. Is that right?
Absolutely.
All right. So these are figures that were published in the Harvard Crimson, the student newspaper. In the Harvard class of 2019, these are the kids who will be graduating next June, the average SAT score for black students was 2149. By the way, these are all good scores, but for black students, 2149, white students, 2218, Asian students, 2300. Well, now that must be reasonable because it's taking place at Harvard, the seat of reason.
Well, that wasn't quite how I described it when I was there.
Affirmative action. Is that we ought not to be doing this?
There are various laws and policies that benefit one group at the expense of another. But I think affirmative action has the distinction of being one that it harms everybody, though in different ways.
There's something you're saying, KNG, and he's not. Nobody is negating the fact. And in fact, what we are saying in the conversation is that one of those entities that benefit from keeping people poor are in the government, and they are the ones who are coming up with with some of these policies and building up agencies to tackle a problem that they end up creating. That's exactly what he's saying. Is that when you give these people power, they're going to end up creating the problem that they claim to want to solve, or they even make it worse if there was really a problem there. That for the most part, it's best if the government allows the natural way of things to just play out organically instead of artificially, trying to create something that does not work. This artificial equality, it doesn't work. Just allow things to happen organically. That is essentially what he's saying. And then when you put these institutions and agencies in place by the government that claim to solve problems, they end up making the problem worse, and they will not go away. Instead, they will tell you that, no, we've been achieving so much progress, and what you are seeing is just another problem now that you also need us to solve, or we need to create another agency to solve. which actually is just a problem that we also have recreated, but we will not admit. So that's what kind of plays out at the end of the day. There's something he was talking about with regards to affirmative action. I don't know if he has said it yet, and but let's keep playing.
And so there's a lot of evidence that there are black kids who have all the qualifications to be successes in college, who nevertheless are failures because they are systematically mismatched with institutions whose standards they don't meet, even though they may meet the standards of 80 or 90% of the colleges in America. I remember first aware of this when I was teaching at Cornell, and I found that half the black students at Cornell were on some kind of academic probation. And so I went over to the administration building and looked up the SATs of these students. The average black student at Cornell at that time scored at the 75th percentile.
Which is pretty darn good.
Yes. And so that means that in most colleges in this country, they would have no trouble, and many of them would be on the dean's list. But at Cornell, the average liberal arts student at that time was in the 99th percentile. And when you're teaching the students like that, you teach at a pace that most people of any race cannot keep up with. And it was always complained that I was assigning all kinds of reading, but heck, I'm teaching kids who are in the top 1%. They can keep up with the reading that I'm assigning.
So Cornell was taking very talented black kids and spending 4 years teaching them to feel inadequate.
Yes, and succeeding at that.
A couple quotations. These are both from the last affirmative action case to reach the Supreme Court, last big affirmative action case to reach the Supreme Court, 2003, Grutter versus Bollinger. Here's the majority opinion, which was written by Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. Quote,
Here is something that I think there is a conversation between Deborah and Fernandez, I said Deborah Fernandez and Dennis Jackson. And Dennis Jackson said we need a minimalist state where we have as little government as necessary. And Deborah said that would be problematic. We need some government measures, right, in economy and social politics. And I agree with you. To some extent, we need the government. It's not like the government should cease to exist. You know that, and I don't think that is what a minimalist state is. It's not saying no government. It's not an anarchy. Okay, is that let's have as little government as possible, as little government as necessary. You know that, and I agree with that 100%. If we can reduce government power to as little as necessary, not giving them this huge power, it will be good. And then maybe those can include them putting certain measures in the economy or some, I don't know about social politics, but whatever social policies you want them to implement or regulations, but as little as possible. We should always be weary of government intervention. I'm telling you, be really weary of it. Be really weary. Ask yourself, is there nothing else we as individuals can do? Before you say, yeah, bring the government in. Yeah, let them get them involved. You know, there's something my dad used to say, he used to say, there's this in Nigerians do where people will be arguing and then they'll call God. They'll be like, I call God to bear witness, stuff like that. And my dad always say, is it like you've called every other person and they've not answered and you decided that the person you are going to call is God? Can't you just make him like the last person you are going to call to judge your situation? Don't you know that he's a just, unbiased judge who will not withhold judgment? Don't you think you should just kind of keep him as the last resort? That's how the government is. Like, shouldn't you just be weak? Can't you explore other options? Look at other possibilities before you are like, yeah, let them come in. Let them come in. Of course, bring them in. Because we elected them, Because when they come to solve the problem, they are going to increase your tax. Because they are going to build an agency that is going to solve the problem. And that agency is going to get paid. Are you sure you want that? How much? And then they are going to also, to solve some problems, they are also going to take your rights because maybe they will have to introduce a law that then limits your freedom. Do you really want that? So yeah, this was said. I have no sympathy for anyone going to Cornell. Yeah, he's talking about affirmative action and how some people get to universities that you're not supposed to be at because, they are being mismatched based on qualifications because of affirmative action. Their qualification is not enough for them to be in the university where they are in, but because of the color of their skin, they get to go to that university. That's what he's talking about. He's not saying you should pity for people in Cornell. All right? By all means, please don't.
The court expects that 25 years from now, the use of racial preferences will no longer be necessary. This upholding the use of, in a decision, 5-4 decision, upholding the use of racial preferences. Now, that's quotation one. Here's quotation two, Justice Clarence Thomas, in a dissent. Quote, I believe that blacks can achieve in every avenue of American life without the meddling of university administrators. The court holds that racial discrimination in admissions should be given another 25 years. While I agree that in 25 years these practices will be illegal, they are illegal now.
True.
Close quote. So what do you do with the argument that Justice O'Connor, writing that majority opinion, there's something of the constrained vision there. Look, we have all universities across the country are using these racial preferences as the basis of admission. The best we can hope to do is tell them they ought not to be doing it, that they should be developing other standards, and give them a clock. Is that a reasonable thing to do?
No, but it's a universal thing to do. I wrote a book about affirmative action. It was called Affirmative Action Around the World. And I made a couple of international trips at the expense of the Hoover Institution around the world to check on affirmative action. This is one of the most common arguments, and it's absolutely fallacious time and time again. The argument that like so much in the unconstrained vision, it assumes that we have a power that we do not have, cannot have, and never have had. Yeah. In England, there was a man named Scarman who was saying, for the now, we must do this in order to, and in many countries, these programs were set up with an actual cutoff date. So it was set up in Malaysia with a cutoff date, I think, of around 1990, and in Pakistan, it was supposed to go for 10 years. None of those cutoff dates has met a thing. These programs not only continue, they increase, they spread. So the idea that you can control the future because of these wonderful sounding words, I can't think of a country in the world where that's ever happened.
And this thing he said about affirmative action is true. You know, many people in the US think affirmative action only exists in the US. It exists everywhere in the world. Well, not everywhere. We can't tell about, but in Nigeria it exists, especially in education, right? In Nigeria, we call it quota system, right? It's a quota system. So there are areas in Nigeria where we say these people are less educated, and the goal of the institutions and the government is to ensure that those people get more education. You know, we want them more. We want more graduates from, let's say, the North, which is usually the regular corporate in this situation. The North, because the North, I don't know, they have this serious obsession. A particular tribe in the North has this serious obsession with illiteracy. So the government is like, yeah, we want to ensure that people in the North are graduates, have degrees, have masters, have PhDs, and what have you. So for them to encourage Northerners to go to school, they lower the entry requirements, the requirement they need for entry into the university. It happens. Every university in Nigeria has what we call a cutoff mark, a general cutoff mark, and then a catchment cutoff mark. And that catchment cutoff mark is for particular areas that is believed to have less educated people or less graduates. And the government is trying to even it out so that every demographic will have the same amount of graduates, right? And so because they want people from the North to have more graduates, they lower the standard and say, okay, yeah, the Northerners don't need to reach the general cutoff mark. If they reach the social cutoff mark, they get in. And what has been the result? Any Nigerian in the chat can tell you. Northerners have not become more educated as a result. That has not happened. You cannot, through a policy, make people love education. You cannot, through a policy, get rid of a culture that is obsessed with illiteracy. Schools have been built in the north. So many things have been done in the north. Allocation into education in the north is abundant, more than you can ever see in the south. It has never led to people in the north being more educated. Instead, what has happened is that those in the south who really love education and want to be educated are denied that opportunity because we want to make sure that there is, equal distribution of education. Right? That is what it has resulted into. Another thing is that it has resulted in corruption in admissions. Right? That's another thing that has happened in Nigeria, that you now have a corrupt admission process where some people even lie about their ethnicity because they want to get into the university. Somebody who is Chinedu now goes by Musa because he wants to get into a particular university, claim to be whatever. And then also you now have people who have to bribe their way to get into these schools because you've created these quotas that must be fulfilled. Doesn't make sense. That's why when I had affirmative action was the decision that kind of did away with the policy, and people were like, "Oh, this is bad." I'm like, no. It was never good. I know some people will say I benefited from it. I'm not. That you benefited from something that is bad does not make it good. Okay? That you can say, oh, I'm very sure you'll find one or two Northerners who will tell you, oh, one of the things that really made it possible for me to get into the university and get a degree was because of, the quota system in university admissions. Fair, good, but it has. If that is you, that does not speak to the justness and the effectiveness of the system or the policy. That's what people don't understand. And also, so many of these Northerners, when they get into these schools, they don't do well. They don't do well because you're not operating on the same level with the average individual who got into those universities. And it is going to show. So what is the solution? Instead of trying to create quota systems, why don't you help? Right? That would be a better solution, is help these people at least change their culture towards Western education. Encourage, encouraging is not by building schools. It's not like let's make the building more schools in the north that is going to end up getting filled by Southerners who are going to travel to the north to fill it up, because that's what end up happening. How about, you speak to the culture of the people that, there, and talk, let's have a conversation about this culture. Let's engage this culture and see if we can change it and make it, receptive to Western education. But that will not require the government, right? That will not require the government. It will require community leaders doing the right thing and telling their people, look, there's even the one that the government did. It's so funny. The government have done so many things to make people in the north go to school. There was this one they did where it was like feeding program. If you go to school, you're going to get fed breakfast, lunch, dinner. I know in Western schools, that's like, oh, well, it goes without saying. Every public school offers free lunch. But that was not the case. I'm talking in the average Nigerian school, no school, no public school offer you free lunch. It doesn't happen. But in the north, they made it a thing, just so as to entice people to come to school. Didn't change anything. We are going to build more schools. What happened? Boko Haram came and kidnapped the girls who decided to go to school. So it's going to take more than that to fix the problem. So can we talk about the culture? And that will not require the government. Right? And for me, I feel sometimes maybe the government should not intervene. Maybe they shouldn't. How about the government allow you don't want to be educated? Fine. Those who want to go to school should go. Those who don't want should not. Down the line, you are going to realize the huge disparity between you and those people. And it is going to send a message, a crucial message down your thick skull. That, maybe education is way better because these people are living a better life than I am living. Maybe you're going to, down the line, realize that that's the problem. And quickly want to be like the people who are doing better. And then, ditch that culture that is preventing you from, accepting Western education. How about that? It's not everything that the government can fix, but believe me, they will not. They will never believe that. Especially the people in government will never believe that, because that would mean that they are useless for the most part.
In the case of Pakistan, they did have an actual cutoff date.
Yeah, they are. They are.
And because the people in East Pakistan were, for whatever historical reason, way behind the people in West Pakistan. And so there's these preferences for the East Pakistanis. Now, before time for this thing to expire, the East Pakistanis seceded from Pakistan and formed a new nation of Bangladesh.
Bangladesh, right.
And the preferences continued right on because there were other groups that had been added to it. And so once you get the constituency, you can't say no to them.
I see.
It is an argument that has never worked out anywhere that I've been able to check.
All right. So Tom Sowell says no to the welfare state, no to affirmative action. What is to be done? And now you were kind enough to share with me the galleys of your forthcoming edition of Discrimination and Disparities. Let me give you a few quotations from some of the new chapter in that book. Quote, "The poverty rate among black married couples has been less than 10% every year since 1994. As far back as 1969, young black males whose homes included newspapers, magazines, and library cards had..."
It's not just women. It's an entire cultural issue in the North. Like it's just a culture. They have, like I said, their culture is really obsessed with illiteracy. And I'm putting it mildly. It when I consider it, it annoys me. Like I've never seen something so annoying. And what annoys me the most about it is the amount of resources that their government, the Northern government, have spent. Let me tell you something. For example, if you want to start an NGO, let's say you say I want to start an NGO and I want to get funding from foreign agencies like, let's say, UNICEF, UN, whatever program they have when it has to do with education, and you want to have an NGO that is to promote education in Africa or in Nigeria, for example. And you go and meet UNICEF or you go and meet any of these UN agencies and you say, oh, I want to start this NGO, and the aim of this NGO is to educate people in the South. Let's say the state you are focusing on is a state in southern Nigeria. You most likely will not get the funding for that. You most likely will not get it. But if you meet these NGOs and tell them, oh, I want to open a school, and the plan of this, whatever my own NGO is to focus on, let's say, a state in the North, immediately you will get the funding. UNICEF will be like, yeah, go to the North and teach these people, because they know, the North is where the real problem of education is. So you have NGOs, so many of them that have taken advantage of the fact that Northerners don't like education. They go get money from UNICEF. The plan is to start up a school or to start up an education program. Never happens. Right? There's one, Jonathan, good luck, Jonathan, build schools. I'm telling you, build schools in the North, to get favor from Northern Nigerians and let them like him and, vote him again. They did not vote him again anyway. And build schools for them. Beautiful schools. Said these schools is schools for Alimajiris. Nothing. None of them attended. We've had governors say we had feeding programs. You go to school, you're going to get fed. Nothing. The students come, eat, and leave. And then people who end up filling those schools are people who from the South, especially when it has to do with the university. And they have the best universities in the North. We're talking about ABU Zaria. Very prestigious university in Nigeria. And what happened is people from the South will move to the North. Will move to the North to take advantage of those educational those opportunities in education that are available in the North. That's what end up happening. Many of them will have to change their names so that people will think that they are Southerners, that they are Northerners, but they are actually Southerners, taking advantage of opportunities that has been stolen from Southerners who really want it and given to Northerners who don't want it. That's what we have. That's what we have in my beautiful country. And any Nigerian in the chat will confirm this thing I'm telling you. They will confirm this thing I'm telling you because it's true. We've seen it over and over again.
Similar incomes to those of their white counterparts. Academic outcomes show a pattern of disparities similar to the pattern of disparities in the amount of time devoted to schoolwork. Apparently, lifestyle choices have consequences.
Yes.
Close quote. So this is the constrained vision once again. Welfare state, that's government, we don't rely on that. Affirmative action, government, we don't rely on that. We rely on hard work. We rely on the institution of marriage. That's correct?
Yes, in other words, these things, I don't think it's the marriage as such or the library cards as such. It's that there are lifestyle choices that have been made. And the comparison I made was between, if you look at the poverty rate among blacks, it was 22%, and among whites it was 11%. But among black married couples, it was 7.5%.
Right.
So it's not, so they not only do better than blacks as a whole, they do better than whites as a whole. And so it's lifestyle choices. Similarly with the results in some of these more successful charter schools, that you have these kids not only meeting but exceeding the national standards in places like Harlem and Bedford-Stuyvesant in the South Bronx. And these are not kids who are skimming the cream. They're kids chosen by lottery. They don't even test them for ability. They don't even look at their academic records. They take them into the schools and they have hard work and they make it clear at the outset, and they don't tolerate a lot of nonsensical behavior. And these kids are doing incredibly.
So, Tom, here, again, I think back to the Moynihan. Well, no, I think so. The Moynihan report in '65, and he was very alarmed by the
And just like Thomas Sowell said here, it's just culture. You talk about single parents household living in poverty, and then you talk about two parents household not living in poverty. So what is the solution? Two parents household. What is the government solution? No. Let's those single parents household, let's give them money. If we give them money, it's going to solve their problem. What do you think is going to happen? You're going to have more of those. Because now you are rewarding bad behavior. That is what government intervention does. It rewards bad behavior. People in the north are not going to school, you give them more schools. You are rewarding bad behavior. People in the south want to go to school, you give them no schools. Now you are forcing them to migrate for education purposes, for the purpose of education. It's that simple, guys. It's really that simple.
legitimacy rate of 25% among African Americans. By the way, in fairness to the late Moynihan, we should point out one reason he was alarmed by this was his own father had walked out on the family when he was 10 years old. He experienced what it meant to kids to have one parent. Okay. And now it's all gotten dramatically worse for whites and Hispanics and black, for everybody. And then I think back beyond.
You see, this what I'm saying with regards to the North is not, when I say culture of illiteracy, I'm not talking about Islam. Maybe Islam in a way, I don't know how much of it is because of Islam. Like, I don't want to say it's Islam. I just know that when it comes, it's just, they have a unique culture. I don't know how much of it has to do with the religion. I don't know how much of it has to do, because you need to check it across the board. Is that the same in other Islamic countries? I don't think so. And I don't even think the Islam that Northern Nigerians practice is the same with every other people. Their own Islam is as primitive. Jesus Christ, it's so freaking primitive. I'm like, no. Even some Islamic countries don't do this. So I don't know if theirs is really a consequence of Islam or if it's just backwardness that, this insistence on being, living the old, not wanting to live the old ways of doing things, resisting change, People have a culture that is so resistant to change. That's just how I would describe it.
On that, to your experience of Harlem, you drop out of high school and do what? Go on welfare? Start cashing? No, you went to work. And you spent some of that money to buy some inexpensive encyclopedias.
Yeah.
And the Harlem was sick. So But I feel this council, it's almost a council of despair in that that world just seems so utterly vanished.
No question.
So your argument is if we can stand up to the welfare state, we can somehow get back to that world. A family structure will reassert itself.
Oh, that's going to be reconquering the same ground, which is very tough to do, but it can be done. I was so lucky. At the time I had no clue about all this. I left home in 1948. Many decades later, I learned that the unemployment rate among black teenagers in 1948, 16, 17-year-olds, was 9.4%. Among whites of the same age, it was 10.2%. So both blacks and white teenagers had only a fraction of the unemployment that they have today.
You were expected to work. You were expected to be able to get a job.
And more importantly, the jobs were there for you. This is because of a fluke, really. The minimum wage law in the United States, Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, was passed with specified rates of pay that you're supposed to get. Almost immediately, inflation took off during the 1940s. So by 1948, those numbers that were in the law were meaningless.
Oh, I see.
In other words, when I started out as a Western Union messenger, the minimum wage was 40 cents an hour. I started out at the bottom at 65 cents an hour. So it was the same as if there was no minimum wage. And this is what happened. You had this, and I was so lucky. I, of course, had no clue about any of this. Now a black kid 20 years later comes in there. People have become compassionate. They raised the minimum wage, so he can't get a job.
Now he can't get a job. Exactly. You raise the minimum wage, now he can't get a job because the job no longer exists. If you lower the minimum wage, these companies will be able to hire more people. Now they are replacing, the higher the minimum wage get, they are replacing, human workers with robots, with machines. What do you think is causing that? Because it's now, by law, they are now mandated to pay you more. So now you get replaced. Or jobs that are supposed to be done by 3 people is now done by, that used to be done by 3 people is now done by 1 person. Because, you've raised the minimum wage. And now there are so many people who are unemployed and you're wondering why. Doesn't make sense, And the government is doing this purely, of course, they are trying to be compassionate and stuff, but at the end of the day, they are not. They are not. There's another thing that they mentioned here. I don't know at what point they mentioned it, but when they said it, what came to my mind was that we need to, as a society, we need to promote personal responsibility. I think it's going to solve a lot of problems. It's not going to solve all our problems. The problem of society will not vanish in one day simply because people take personal responsibility, make wise choices, and, put their life in order and do the right thing. Get an education, get married, stay married, stuff like that. Make wise choices, spend wisely, spend within your means, be responsible. I don't think it's going to solve all of your problems, but it's going to solve most of them. And when you're somebody who is responsible, taking personal responsibility is the foundation for every other form of change. Right now, we have people who are demanding for social change, but their life is a mess. How do you think you're going to be effective at doing that? I mean, have you seen those people who protest climate change? You cannot look at the color of their hair and come to the conclusion that this person is responsible. There's nothing about a nose ring that gives off the vibe of somebody who is responsible. Clearly, these people have not even put their life in order. Many of them have a laundry list of mental health issues. They've not even fixed their own bedrooms, but they want to change the world. Just this laziness, this running away from personal accountability and trying to hold someone else accountable, somehow getting this false sense of morality from doing so. That is what we see in society today. And personal responsibility is the bedrock. Start by putting your own life in order. People always argue that, are you trying to say there is no room for government? There is. There's a role government has to play. But the government will be more effective if people are more responsible. And when people are more responsible, the government get to do less. When the government get to do less, the little they have to do, then they can do it better. But when they become big, don't you understand that when things become bigger, it's hard to control, hard to manage? And check any country in the West where you have a big government, you have a large chunk of the population who are irresponsible, who make irresponsible decisions and as in just leeching on the system and thinking they have every right to do. That's the one that even annoys me the most, is that you are a parasite and you think that you have the right to be that. Every other person is bearing the cost of your irresponsible choices. You are making life difficult for other people. And of course, you have a government that wants to be your father for life. It's like the government wants to be the child of that person who refused to leave home.
And I don't think it does any community any good to have a whole lot of teenage males hanging around on the streets with no job and nothing to do.
Right. Tom, so, but another thought here. You're describing a world, Harlem, the urban world, gone.
Yeah.
But you made visits when you were young. You knew the South as well, didn't you? You went back to the South when you were young from time to time? I said back to the South because, as I recall, you were born in the South.
Yeah.
I
went to New York.
Went to New York.
Yeah. Well, I think this was courtesy of the Marine Corps, which happened to locate the boot camp in South Carolina and Camp Lejeune in North Carolina.
Okay. So what I'm getting at is, you were of the generation that saw Jim Crow with your own eyes.
Oh, no question. No question.
Okay. So, well, let me read you a quotation. This is from an article that got a lot of attention in The Atlantic a couple of years ago called The Case for Reparations by Ta-Nehisi Coates. Quote, "White supremacy is a force so fundamental to America that it is difficult to imagine the country without it. Reparations is the price we must pay to see ourselves squarely." Close quote. And Tom Sowell, who actually saw Jim Crow with his own eyes and experienced it, responds how?
It would be nice to know his evidence for what he said, just to be old-fashioned about it. No, it was a rotten system. But I don't know how we get from that to reparations. I mean, what we see in the United States in terms of the bad things, you see all around the world. If you were to give reparations to everyone whose ancestors had been slaves, I suspect that you would have to give reparations to more than half the entire population of the globe. Slavery was not confined to one set of races. I suspect that most of the people who were either slaves or slave owners around the world were neither white nor black. Mm-hmm. I mean, this was a universal curse.
If you had to give reparations to everybody, just money would just be changing hand. You just give this person money and say, sorry for enslaving you. This person gives the money to another person. And then we keep going back to know how many people. The idea that the only way to compensate people who have suffered atrocities in the past is to pay them money or to give them some kind of benefit or preferential treatment now in order to make up for the bad things you did in the past in the name of reparations is stupid. Because one thing I've noticed about people who get special benefit and preferential treatment is that they often do not do well. And I'm saying this as somebody who lives in a country that has committed historic atrocity against his own tribe. Right? Many people don't know this about Nigeria, but in the 1960s, late 1960s, there was something that happened in Nigeria known as the Nigerian Civil War. Right? It was all like we in the East like to call it the Biafran War. What happened was that there was a war between Nigeria, the eastern part of Nigeria, and the rest of the country. And the eastern part of Nigeria is made mostly of people, of the Igbo tribe. So it was the Igbo tribe versus the rest of Nigeria. And I'm from the Igbo tribe, right? And the Nigerian government, one of the instruments of war that they used in that war was starvation. That's what they did. The one way they were able to win the war was not because it was not in the battlefield. Was that people people who occupied the territory that was declared, territory of Biafra, which is, Igbo land. We are left to starve. The government cut out their access, cut their access to food supply. Even when foreign aid will be coming by virtue of food to these people, the government will shoot those planes. That was how the Nigerian government fought. And for years, as when this war was going on, how many million? It's more than 3 million Igbo people died of starvation. These are not people, these are not soldiers. Many of them didn't even want the war was just Ojukwu and Yakubu Gowon for the most part. And child soldiers that were recruited. It was a major, as in atrocity by the Nigerian government. Happened to Igbo people. After the war was over, what did the government do? Institute NYSC to ensure harmony amongst the tribes. The Nigeria didn't do anything. It's not like we received special programs as Igbos to make up for what happened. No. But today you see Igbos still being industrious, still thriving, living lavishly. Still having the best, getting the best, excelling in every aspect of the economy, whether it's in trade, in commerce, in education, and in every sphere. Doing well, way better than so many other tribes. That some of the tribes are even envious. We didn't need anybody. We've never even requested. The thought has never even crossed the mind of the average Igbo person that, hey, maybe we should be paid something for what happened. No. That's what lazy people do. And to come and say, oh, yeah, white supremacy is a thing in the West, and if you can just give black people money, they will be better. You think if you give a riffraff money, somehow it's going to stop being a riffraff. Then you have another thing coming.
The human species.
Africa, the Middle East, Asia, slavery took place everywhere.
And it continued elsewhere long after it was abolished in the Western countries.
All right. Let me try as sticking with Ta-Nehisi Coates. Shelby Steele talks about white guilt. And in Ta-Nehisi Coates, you get almost the counterpart of that, a kind of African-American claim against the white guilt. And this seems, beginning with the abolitionists, even beginning before the Civil War, you seem almost every generation, there's some expression that racism and slavery, as Shelby calls it, correctly, of course, the sin of slavery is so deeply, and it's something we still live with. How do we expiate it? How do we get past it? Is there something we can do to relieve ourselves of this legacy?
Let me tell you one thing you can do about the issue of slavery. Is there anybody who brings it up, you tell the person to get the hell out of your face. And tell him, has he ever been a slave? Say, no. Say, please, don't you ever bring this thing up to me. I don't want to hear about it. Let them accuse you of whatever they want to accuse you of. Tell them you're not a serious human being. Any person who brings that thing up, just tell the person, you're not a serious human being. You are of all men most unserious. That's the rest. Like they talk about racism, slavery just annoys them. Whenever they bring, I'm like, can you just shut the hell up? Just shut the hell up. Talking about something that happened when? The funny thing is that there's this slavery going on today. Oh, that's not the one. No, that is not an issue, of course. Maybe it will become an issue 300 years from now, because people like to wait, to cash in.
Well, I think you should repeat it. If you were a slave owner, I don't see any reason why you should feel differently. On the other hand, I can't get over the idea of A, apologizing for what B did.
Okay.
Even when they're contemporaries, much less when one is dead and the other is alive.
All right.
I mean, Scalia, I remember was saying, that I owe no man anything because people who look like me did something that people who look like him.
Okay, so just get past it. Get to work.
Yeah.
All right. Tom Sowell's view is get an education, stay married, and do your job.
Exactly. Personal responsibility. Take charge of your freaking life. Work. Be committed. You know, there is nothing that beats that. I'm not saying it's going to make it. This is one thing people don't understand. They're going to be like, oh, there's always going to be disparities. Of course, nobody said what hard work is going to. Is the only requirement for you to become Elon Musk. But nobody become Elon Musk. I don't know if I pronounce that guy's last name well. Sorry if I don't. But nobody becomes the richest man in the world that doesn't work hard. Don't buy the lie. There's no person who gets to that point that did not work hard. It's not by accident. You can become Justin Bieber by accident, but you don't become Bill Gates by accident. You know. And even Justin Bieber, do you know how much, you know, devotion he puts to his craft? You know, even all those people who became famous one hit wonder, you think to remain on top, they have to just do nothing? It's not easy. Hard work is like the bedrock of everything you ever achieve. There are other things that will come to play. Luck is also there. You know, nobody is undermining that. You know, getting to know people, relationships, you know, there's a role it plays. But hard work is a constant. And I'm not saying there are not some people who for a brief moment become successful even though they are lazy, but how long does it last? Everybody knows that the prosperity of the slothful will not last. For the most part, it will even destroy him. So to use one or two examples of slothful people who made it, what is their end? But we all know that bedrock of every person who becomes successful is that they were hardworking. So work hard. You may not get $1 billion, but you will not die of hunger.
Roughly.
Yeah.
All right. Charles Murray. You used to write a column every so often called Random Thoughts on the Passing Scene.
Yes.
And so I'm giving you a little snippets here of the passing scene in our final questions. Charles Murray, in his 1984 book, Losing Ground, and Charles Murray writes about discussions in academia and government about the effort to close the gap again between African Americans and whites. Quote, 1984, quote, whites had created the problem. It was up to whites to fix it, and there was very little in the dialogue that treated blacks as responsible actors, close quote. Yes. Has that changed?
No, it has not.
All right. On we go to the passing scene. Your longtime friend, Walter Williams. Now we come to current politics. The bottom line is that President Donald Trump does not have the personal character that we would want our children to imitate, but save his misguided international trade policies, has turned out to be a good president. Tom?
I think his policies have been, by and large, policies that were far better than that of previous Democratic or Republican administrations. So I go by the consequences.
Okay.
I mean, he hasn't produced the right rhetoric, but the fact is that unemployment among low-income people, black, Hispanic included, is at a level that is far lower than it's been in decades.
Which is something that they don't want to give him credit for. This is something that Trump achieved that they don't want to give him credit for. That American economy was so good under Trump that even me in Nigeria, I felt it. And I tell you how. It's because I was working remotely, right? I was working remotely for a particular agency. The funny thing about the agency that I was working in is that under Trump, they hired so many of us, like so many of us. And now under Joe Biden, they let go of so many of us. That's how, for me, that was the indication that, all right, Trump was way better. Trump was way better. It's undeniable. So there you have it.
The economy is booming in a way that no one had predicted. People like Paul Krugman was saying that when Trump gets in, the economy is going to tank. No, the economy hit new highs.
All right.
But there are so many people among the intelligentsia, especially, who are absolutely immune to facts. It's as if they took their anti-fact shots every year, and the facts will just not affect them.
So this brings us back.
So people are immune to facts. Preach. So people are so immune to facts. Nothing you say to them about the facts is going to. So people are really that immune to facts. He has a very great point.
I can understand. I mean, I really can. My understanding is limited, which is why I'm going to put this in the form of a question. I can understand the never Trumpers who don't bother me with economic boom because this man is on my television screen every single night and I can't stand him. I can understand. I can see that impulse. I can understand what
This
they
is
feel.
the second consecutive president of the United States that I automatically turn off when I'm watching on television.
All right. Keep the remote right next to your
yes.
hand. Okay. Who was the first?
Obama.
Got it. You're totally bipartisan in that regard.
Oh,
Tom.
always.
That's funny. That's funny.
No other way.
But the Great Society, the larger point that you've been making here, the Great Society, the war on poverty, this is now 6 decades of experience.
Yes.
And we have, as you have said, the gap hasn't closed. We've got dissolution of the family structure, rising crime rates. That I don't understand. How can it be that the people, now I don't know how to remain bipartisan, but Democrats, liberals, the progressives, just are not, the evidence is in. This has not worked. Why, after more than half a century, there's still a refusal to look at the evidence.
Yes, and there's even a tendency to falsify the evidence.
And how come?
I think people become attached to a vision, and that really warps the way they see the world. Human beings have an enormous capacity to rationalize.
Yeah.
Yeah, and another, I think another reason is that many people in the West, and just generally, they get so used to something that they cannot imagine their life without it. Right? People are now addicted, more or less, to these things. Like if you say you want to cut off welfare, you're not going to win an election. People are now addicted. They are hooked on it. It's like a drug, and you're telling people that you're going to cut it off. It might be the solution, but these junkies will not let you. You know, these junkies that are now addicted to irresponsibility, you think they're just going to let you all of a sudden. That's why the change needs to start culturally first before it becomes political, right? So that is like a story of is the issue of the chicken and the egg, which comes first. But you have to start somewhere, and I think the best place you can start is to address the culture that encourages these things to continue. Because there are people who support this. There are people who support government intervention. There are people who are waiting for the next one to happen because they are hooked on it. It's like a drug. Think about it and really think about it like a junkie, right? A junkie gets hooked on, let's say, the least drug that will get you, that will give you that ecstasy, that euphoria, right? And they want to get that high again, right? What do you think they're going to go? They're going to go for a more powerful drug and a more powerful drug after that, and a more powerful drug until they probably overdose. And that is what happens in society. It's like people are now addicted to irresponsibility. So they're looking for more of the responsibility they can take off their shoulder and hand over to an organization. And they're going to continue doing that until probably they either get into rehab or they overdose. And that overdose becoming communism. That's how I see it. So the best solution is to people to, try and see if they can, if the Western society can get into rehab. Okay. And, people begin to teach people again, make it a value again make it popular again to value, being responsible, taking your life taking your destiny into your own hands, being the captain of your soul, the master of your fate. And I think if you can start on a cultural level and you can be able to capture the culture, you can change the politics. So for me, that's probably is the long route, but yeah, that's the route.
Again, notes on the passing scene. An article from the New York Times just a couple of days ago, quote, now this is a longish quotation, but it's important to lay out the facts here. Over the last decade, the charter school movement gained significant foothold in New York. The movement hoped to set a national example. If charter schools could make it in a deep blue state like New York, they could make it anywhere. Over 100,000 students in the city's charter schools are doing well on state tests, and tens of thousands are on waiting lists. But the election of this November, suggested that the golden era of charter schools is over. The insurgent Democrats did well across New York, but especially in the state Senate, have repeatedly expressed hostility to the movement, close quote. And Tom
Because they're
Sowell
beholden to
responds to that set
the
of facts,
teachers'
Hal.
union.
Oh, that really is one of the moral outrages, that for many kids who are cut from a very poor background and whose parents may not have had much education, a decent education is the one thing they have to have a better life. And these schools have been absolutely spectacular.
The charter schools.
The charter schools, the successful ones. Now, there are a few that weren't. But for example, a few years ago, on the statewide, New York statewide math tests, there was an elementary school, grade 4, I believe, in Harlem, whose students passed those tests at a higher rate than any fourth grade kids anywhere in the state of New York. I mean, we're talking Scarsdale, Briarcliff, places like that. The Success Academy schools as a whole, their students pass both the math and the English statewide tests at a higher rate than any school district in the entire state of New York. The vast majority of the kids in the Success Academy schools are either black or Hispanic. If you look at the 5 highest.
This commenter, what do you need context on? I don't know. I don't. Maybe you're responding to me or to someone else, but what exactly do you need context with regards to? I'm here for you.
Scoring school districts in the state in terms of the percentage of the students who pass the math or the English tests. Their average family income ranges from four times that of the kids in the Success Academy schools to more than 9 times the family income of the kids in the Success Academy schools. And yet, the mayor of New York is doing his darndest to put a stop to the expansion of schools in general, but his special ire is aimed at the Success Academy schools. And this is happening all over the country.
Because they make the teachers' unions look bad that run the public schools? What's the political motivation? Why would Mayor de Blasio have an out for the charter schools, such as Success Academy?
Well, the teachers' union are the major reason. And we're talking about the money they contribute, the number of votes they contribute, and the schools, and what's happening, again, not just in New York, but in other parts of the country, including California, is that they have there's all kind of chicanery to prevent the charter schools from expanding. That's why you have tens of thousands on the waiting list. Right. It's not that the charter schools aren't willing to expand, but every conceivable obstacle is put in their way. Because if you let that go at the natural pace, it would be very hard for the public schools to compete. And one of the things they're doing is imposing the same kinds of restrictions on the charter schools that made the public schools so bad. For example, restrictions on being able to get rid of kids who are running amok and ruining the education of everybody else. And the charter schools don't tolerate that. The things that are tolerated in the public schools are unbelievable.
So when I asked you a moment ago, how do we bring back the standards of the Harlem in which you grew up, the answer is that's a hard thing to do. But we do know how to do one thing. We do know how to establish schools where the kids in present-day Harlem have a shot. They have a chance of getting a good education.
Yeah, you don't have to bring back the past, even if you could. Because we have it in the present. We have this happening.
And so we know how to do that, and the Democratic establishment in New York wants to shut it down.
Yes. And the Republican establishment stands mute.
Yeah, yeah. That's the problem I see in America. I remember somebody tweeted one time and was like, "You cannot say that I'm not on both sides. We are not the Republicans are not the ones doing this." Listed a couple of things that Democrats were doing. I was like, Republicans don't do that. And I was like, yeah, but from what I see, you guys do nothing. That's the problem is exactly that you people do absolutely nothing. Democrats are the one doing, they are ruining everything, destroying everything, but at least they are doing something, even though it is making things worse. Why you just sit complacent and not doing anything? In every topic, it's Democrats are ruining it, Republicans are staying idle. And kind of make it look like people are on the same team rather. When one side does something wrong and the other one is all they do is complain, right? All they do is complain, right? Democrats are fighting charter schools, and what are Republicans doing? They're not fighting at all. They're not fighting the Democrats and trying to, help the charter schools. They just give up and just say, okay, fine. The same thing with gender ideology. Thank God that right now things are changing in that regard. People are like, and I don't think it's mostly Republicans. I would say it's, and of course, people make it look like both things are synonymous, but I don't see them as the same, right? Conservatism is the ideology, Republican is the party. And I think it's mostly conservatives, especially the ones who know how to fight, that are leading that change, especially when it comes to do with gender ideology. And then there are also feminists and also people in the middle who are not in support of it. That's why this thing is really something that has become a major issue, in the sense that there's major resistance to the push to sexualize children, rob women of their of opportunities and privileges that was designed for them and stuff like that. That is why that is something that is is not a winning political issue, where if you do not stand with the gender cuts, you might win. That is not a winning issue. It wasn't really because Republicans were like, no, we are going to no. For them, if people did not make it an issue, if it was not made an issue, Republicans for the most part will have let it slide. Some of them have. Right? Some of them have, although you call them milquetoast Republicans. Sorry, I'm getting too involved in US politics, but at least I know enough to say one or two things about it. And I think that is, for me, the real problem, the real issue with the politics in the West in general. And it's not just America. You see it even in Canada. You see it in the UK. I remember Nicola DeSanto said you have a Republican party, the Tory party, right, in the UK, that is not everything but, a conservative party in the UK, the Tory party, that is everything but conservative. The same thing in Canada. You have, I've forgotten what they call the supposed, conservative party in Canada that goes along with some of the things that, liberals will push forward, because they want to win general elections and they feel they have to win the approval of people in the cities, because major cities are where you have major population, and to win an election you need cities. They don't even sell their ideas. That's one of the problems that I see with Republicans, is that you have good ideas, you don't even sell them. You just adopt whatever is already in place and see if you can win elections, by compromising to the popular ideology. You have better ideas. You have better ways of doing things. You are pushed. You are motivated by an ideology that wants to conserve, the old ways, so to speak. The good qualities, good values in the old ways. You have that ideology, and instead of trying to do exactly what the ideology demand of you and sell the idea, you're always playing defense. You're never on the offensive. And then when things go bad, you're like, you see, this is the problem with the Democratic Party. And I'm like, what do you do? What are you useful for? What do? You don't even use your position as in politics to cause any cultural change that will make, the things you stand for more accessible and popular. Nothing. You just like, oh, you see what these other people are doing, and that's just it. And for me, I just feel that is a sad condition. That's all I can say. And
I love
we'll
talking
soon
to
be
you, but I
over
really
this.
don't know why. It's all discouraging. Tom, you mentioned again a moment ago the way young.
Yes, it can be said of most of the unions. And this is from Kim J. He said in Canada, our educational system is a mess. And it all starts when they took away the ability of a child to fail a grade. Kids and parents lost interest in getting good grades. The same thing that I saw an article the other day in the New York, I think New York Post, and they were talking about how children will no longer be allowed to fail. I mean, if they are no longer allowed to fail, you can as well just say they are not even you don't even need to get educational qualification. You don't even need to attend the school. Why attend in the first place? You can as well just stay in your house and get the qualification. Keep making yourself more useless. That's all I would say to the education system. Just keep making yourself more useless. What question did you ask him? Right? Can humans admit that nothing was ever good for humans anyway? I think that is that is like first step to solving the problem is realize that you were not born into a beautiful blessed state. You are born into a chaos that you are going to try to make the most of. That is a better philosophy of life. No, if only some things were not in place, things would be good. And I'm not saying there are not some things in place that are making things worse, but if you remove those things, things will not be good. They will just be, at least, you can now manage it without somebody making it worse. Life is already bad as it is. Let's come to terms with that. I realize that maybe why we are here is to just triumph through it. If life is so good and great, you will not living and surviving and thriving will not be a triumphant endeavor. And Olakunle said, in many ways, the conservatives and Republicans are just liberals that are a decade or two behind Democrats and other liberals. Exactly. And this from Thomas, say all government everywhere failed also. Yeah, they did.
Young Americans flock to Bernie Sanders. Gallup poll this summer, the proportion of Americans age 18 to 29 that holds a favorable view of capitalism, 45%. The proportion that holds a favorable view of socialism, 51%. Now, I would like you to take a look at a brief video of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who at the age of 29, calling herself a democratic socialist, has just been elected to the House of Representatives from New York. And although she's not seated yet in the new Congress, she went to Washington, and one of her first acts was to participate in a sit-in in the offices of House Majority Leader Nancy Pelosi. That is to say, the leader of her own party.
Yes.
So here's a brief video.
I just want to let you all know how proud I am of each and every single one of you for putting yourselves and your bodies and everything on the line to make sure that we save our planet, our generation, and our future. And it's so incredibly important. We have to get to 100% renewable energy in 10 years. There is no other option.
Tom, to her supporters, to the supporters of Bernie Sanders, to young Americans, what would you say?
I would say get some facts first. Know what you're talking about before you start spouting out this kind of stuff. One of the things I do in the new book is I suggest that there's a certain opinion about what happened in the 1920s where the taxes were cut from the highest tax rate was cut down from 73% to 24%. And the argument was, oh, this is tax cuts for the rich. And I have suggested that students and that the Secretary of the Treasury did this in support of a trickle-down theory and so forth. And I suggested that the student would be a wonderful project to go read what the Secretary of the Treasury actually said.
Andrew Mellon in the 1920s,
Yes.
about these tax cuts.
And then go on the internet and get the Internal Revenue official data on who paid how much taxes in the 1920s. And it turns out if you do that, you find that Andrew Mellon said the exact opposite of what he is attributed. It is attributed to him in textbooks that have been sold widely for decades on end through successive editions. And what you'll find is that and when the tax rate was at 73%, the people who are making over $100,000 a year, and that's maybe a couple of million in today's money, paid 30% of the taxes. And after the so-called tax cuts for the rich, they paid 65% of all the taxes. And the people with incomes under $5,000, which was a nice income in those days, who were paying 15% when the tax rate was cut, before the tax rate was cut. And after it was cut, they paid just under 1/4% of all the taxes. And so we hear and so there's all kinds of indignation in these scholarly books. We're not talking about just political propaganda. How this was a bonanza for the rich and so on. And people with ordinary incomes paid practically nothing in income tax after the tax cuts. And millionaires, the share of millionaires was, I think, 4% before that. And it was 19% afterwards. But the facts simply do not matter. They say these words.
These people are immune to facts. It's the same thing about the whole climate change movement. AOC, of course, is an actress. I remember I was so pleased when her documentary was a major flop. That her documentary on climate change. The only people who watched it were people who participated in the documentary. Eventually, a major flop. And that lady is an actress. She's an actress, and she says the dumbest thing I've ever heard from the lips of a politician in the West has been from the lips of AOC. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Like, the lady is dumb. The lady is really, really... I've done a couple of videos about dumb things that she has said. The lady is really dumb. Like, I usually say Nigerian government, like, of course, we don't have, like, election integrity in Nigeria. But if we ever did, we will never... I know... Despite how uneducated the most of the country is, right? The high rate of, illiteracy in the country, we will still not, be able to elect somebody this dumb. We will not. She's really so dumb. And she's young. I think it comes with youth anyway. She's really dumb. Yeah, I hear your plight, and we are going to ensure that this climate emergency, blah, blah, blah. Well, was she not the one who said in how many years the world is going to come to an end due to climate change? What year did she give again? What's so ridiculous statement that even those who were like champion of climate change were like, no, that was a little bit exaggerated. That's to tell you how smart she is. Wasn't that the same person who called... was it not she that called abortion the way God shows mercy? That when you allow women to commit abortion, you are allowing them to show God's mercy. Because of course God is so merciful that He kills people. That's essentially mercy killing. But of course people don't really think about the things they say. They are immune, like Thomas Sowell said, they are immune to facts. Facts don't mean anything to them. They have this strong immunity against facts and logic.
They trickle down, and it's like saying abracadabra, and all the miraculous things follow from that.
Tom Sowell, author of a forthcoming edition of Discrimination and Disparities, would you close by reading a brief quotation from your 1987 book, one of my favorites, A Conflict of Visions?
Logic, of course, is not the only test of a theory. Empirical evidence is crucial. And yet social visions have shown a remarkable ability to evade, suppress, or explain away discordant evidence. Historic evasions of evidence are a warning, not a model. Dedication to a cause may legitimately entail sacrifices of personal interest, but not sacrifices of mind or conscience.
Dr. Thomas Sowell, thank you.
Thank you.
For Uncommon Knowledge.
And we soldiered through to the end, ladies and gentlemen. All of you who stayed with me from beginning to the end, you guys are warriors, you are heroes, you are triumphants. Is that even a word? You are victorious, rather. Congratulations to all of us for making it to the end of this. And it was fun, I guess. It was fun. I got a little low spirited like towards the end because I was feeling a bit tired, but I didn't want to show it. I didn't want to show it, but I hope you guys didn't notice. Anyways, so a couple of things I want to say is, last thing, especially with regards to what AOC was doing, as Congresswoman. No, you've not even resumed office. You're already showing, oh, I recognize your cause. And she knows nothing, but she's always championing a cause. It's one of the things that I find problematic in the West is how people are quick. They are less like they are. They don't care about learning. They don't care about learning, getting information, improving their understanding of how the world works, about how system works and stuff like that. They don't care about any of that, but they are quick to stand for a cause. Being smart is no longer seen as a virtue, but, being an activist, now that's something, Excellence is no longer a requirement, but activism is. You have failed actors who somehow remain prominent because they champion a cause. You have failed movies who get major reviews because they advocate for a cause. You have companies that should not even get money, but people are, championing them because they stand for a cause. And you now have a cause-driven economy, which does not even make sense. I wonder how sustainable any of that can be. And people are talking about capital, free market economy. The truth is, the problem with free market economy, which somebody pointed out, is just how corrupt it can get. Its tendency towards corruption, where people, like what happens these days is you have big companies that are frustrating smaller companies and influencing government decisions because they're now big and they have the money, they have the influence, by they use their economic power to buy political influence and then enact policies that benefit them, but harms the whole process of capitalism. And therefore, you now have this marriage between the government and the private sector. And when you have that, in existence, you can't really call that, actual capitalism, will you? Where the government still has some level of control and now does the bidding of big corporations, and big corporations do the bidding of the government. So there's this symbiotic relationship that has, emanated as a result, where you cannot really tell where the leaves of the government end and the butt of private corporations begin. So, I mean, that is kind of the problem we find ourselves in when you have unchecked, will I call this the failure of the question for me most times is this the failure of capitalism or the failure of the government? Like, what do you think? That government gets, capital, that big corporations are able to influence the government. Is that failure of the system that created those big corporations, or is that failure of the government who cannot withstand or who refuse to withstand the influence of major corporations? For me, I don't see it as the failure of capitalism, but more of the failure of the government. So that's how I see the whole thing. And with that said, we come to a close, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Yeah. See, what's this person? There's something here by Robert Williams. I don't know if that's your real name, but it sounds nice, and I don't know. It's just a Robert Williams that I know. Yeah. Anyways, he said bankers buy corporations, corporations buy politicians, politicians pass laws for bankers and corporations and soldiers and cops enforce it, and we allow it. So for me, the question becomes: is that not failure of politicians? Is that not failure of politicians for them to be easily bought? Why are you? And I think this is another problem with money-driven democracy. Money-driven democracy. That is a problem. We should address that. Where elections are won not just because a candidate is popular, but because the candidate has the largest amount of funding. Like funding is important for every election. So when you now have an election economy, the economics of elections. So now the person who can gather the amount of financial support gets in place, and then he's going to, be answerable to the people who funded his elections. His election and funded his campaign rather. People who funded the campaign are going to be the ones who are going to have a lot of say with about how, this government, this person who won the election is going to run the country, or run his his regime or something, or his government administration, his administration. You're not answerable to people who paid to you, not people who voted for you. And that is the problem we have. Maybe if we can address that system, it will help separate corporations from the government, because there's now this unholy alliance that we see these days with government and private corporation that is making capitalism not function the way it is supposed to. So the question is it the problem of capitalism, or is it the problem of the government? Anyways, thank you everyone for listening to my rant and watching me react to this interesting video. Don't forget to like, and if you are new, please, if you enjoyed this to this point, then please subscribe. I have a lot of things planned. Believe me, I have a lot of things planned. And, subscribe so that you can have access to those things. And also, please follow me on Twitter. We're trying to get to 1,000 subs. We are getting there, not almost there. Not subs, followers. 1,000 followers on Twitter. We are getting there. We are still a long way from there, but we are getting there. So please check the link to my Twitter is in the description of this live stream. And click the link and follow me. I have a destination. So follow me. Thank you very much. I am deeply grateful. And with that being said, we come to the end. Have a wonderful evening or morning or afternoon. And peace.